of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, good morning. Welcome to the show. This is Alex Phillips with you until 1 o'clock today. After a run of a good old 5 days, actually, it's been beautiful sitting in here in the hot seat and keeping you all company throughout the week. And hopefully I will not disappoint today with a nice smorgasbord, a platter of news stories and current affairs, discussions, some opinions, some sarcasm, possibly a bit of wit if I can manage to extract that from myself on this here Friday. The number to call if you want to get in touch and help me out in that endeavour is 03444991000, charged at your standard network rate. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. You know I love those if you're a regular listener. 87222 is the number to text. You have to write the word talk before your text. That way it hits the aerials on top of Talk Towers. And we're on X at talkTV. And what do we have in store for you today? We're going to be talking about more mad migrant rulings. They never end. It's like a constant sort of rotating door of judicial mayhem. Also, here we go again with Labour's peccadillos. I have a feeling the Conservative Party have seen a thread and they're going to continue to pull on it, questioning people's CVs, questioning people's allowances. Also, Ed Miliband's pledge to deliver 650,000 green jobs to Britain, aka Beijing, has been slammed by none other than Tony Blair. Right, shall we jump straight into it then with one of my favourites? My old babber, you know who it is by now. It is James Price, former Conservative government advisor. Hello, James, my darling.
Good morning. Great to be with you again.
Oh, it's always good to have you on. Right, where shall we kick off with all of this? Let's talk about Sri Lanka, because there's a paedophile who's been allowed to stay in Britain. This is despite actually sexually assaulting young boys. But he doesn't want to go home because he's gay.
I mean, you see these stories now quite regularly. And every time I think that the one I've heard is going to be the most ridiculous, the one that I start laughing at and then stop because actually it's deeply unfunny. And then you get worse ones like this. You know, we thought it would be Or has it been already the guy who won't be deported because his son doesn't like foreign chicken nuggets, the woman who won't be deported because her Latvian husband won't like the spicy food back in the Caribbean? You know, all these sorts of things. They get madder and madder and madder. But then you hear something like this, where this disgusting animal, I'm not even going to call him a person, comes to this country and he molested 3 small boys. Right, it's too early in the morning to really go into that, but if you stop and think what that might actually feel like, be like, how utterly disgusting and awful that is. Literally the worst thing that a human can do is to do these sorts of things to children.
Right.
He molested 3 boys and has then fought and I think it's an 11-year battle to stay in this country that he was welcomed into and treated it in the worst possible way, and is now going to be allowed to stay here, presumably carrying on trying to molest more young British children, more young boys, because he's gay. Well, I don't care about this guy's rights.
But what's crazy about this is there is legislation in Sri Lanka that outlaws homosexuality, but prosecutions are vanishingly small. Like a lot of other developing world or Commonwealth countries, they may have legislation in place that say we don't think sexuality should be legal, but do they do much about it? Not really. And actually, not only that, the government has pledged, and the previous government back in 2022 had pledged to actually overturn that legislation and become more LGBTQ friendly. You know what? Even in Sri Lanka, you can change your gender just like that without having any sort of doctor's note. So the idea that this man is going to go home and suddenly have, you know, stones lobbed at him and be persecuted is for the birds. And actually, even if that did happen, I'm sorry, you're a pedo. I don't care.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm with you on this. Look, we don't want people to be persecuted because of immutable characteristics, right? Being gay is something people are. We've made great strides in the West, you know, from a time in which people found it, firstly, it was illegal here, and then people, you know, were a bit funny about the whole thing, and then they've come to realize that it's not about the sex bits, it's about the love bits, and I think that's a great thing we've done. Of course, we can have a wider conversation about some of the other letters in that LGBTQIA word salad soup. But frankly, as you say, this man came here. If he was being persecuted and he came to the UK, you would think he would be so damn grateful to be in a country that was as tolerant and as welcoming as the United Kingdom. What did he do instead? He molested some small British children. I don't give a damn what happens to him. He doesn't belong in this country. He's got to go back. And if they treat him very, very badly because he's a paedophile, well, them's the breaks, right? The answer should be that we should perhaps start treating paedophiles a lot worse in this country so that he maybe wants to go back.
Yeah, well, I kind of agree with that as well. Now, let's talk about HMRC because they've been urged to investigate Rachel Reeves' bank expenses. What do you make of this? Is this the Conservative Party suddenly going, aha, we've got them now. Let's continue to dig and see what more we can get. Are the general public going to sort of be alive to this and whatever HMRC says go, wow, that's it, that's got to be the final straw? Or is this now just becoming a bit of a pantomime?
I mean, all these things are a pantomime to some extent, and it's interesting to see the stories that really do break through. I think the ones that do break through are the ones, frankly, that make the public kind of confirm what they already sort of suspect. I think the British public is a savvy, smart group of people. They voted my old lot, the Conservatives, out. They didn't really vote this Labour lot in, and nobody gave them that much scrutiny. They, you know, I think a lot of people thought Labour are coming in, we'll just see what happens. And very quickly they've seen that just like every old socialist party, they're just full of low-grade liars. And I'm afraid that's what the Labour Party is full of. The bit that worries me about this is that as useless as Rachel Reeves sadly has been, and her budget has been absolutely disgraceful, it's making growth even slower, she's putting in all more stupid rules and all the rest of it. Whatever she's lied about on her CV, and she has lied on her CV a lot and lied to the people who elected her and everybody else as well, she's still the best that they've got.
I know, right?
Pull the brakes on this a bit.
I know, this is what's so crazy. And like you said, I mean, I just think when you look at all these people, they just sort of, it strikes me that a lot of them are thick. Who nicks money from the company they're working for to buy presents for their bosses? I mean, that's just, it's absolutely dumbfounding. Angela Rayner's CV is now under scrutiny for how long she worked as a home help. I mean, the thing is, look, let's be realistic about this. Sometimes I think these stories are sort of Westminster stories for the Westminster bubble's delectation. And a lot of people embellish CVs. A lot of people might round up a number here or a qualification there. Those 2 A's and 3 B's at A-level suddenly become 4 A's and a B by the time, you know, 10 years later you're applying for a different job. I think, you know, there will be people out there thinking, yeah, I might have done that. But when you're in politics, and this whole CV thing, like, where are these CVs, by the way? Is there some sort of like Labour website where every single Labour MP has to put up their CV, or is this sort of on the Commons records? Because if it's on the Commons records, where you're putting your experience up there for the public to see and to scrutinise, lying on it or embellishing it again is just plain thick.
Well, exactly. The idea that you won't get caught out for these sorts of things, it constantly flabbergasts me that politicians think they can get away with stuff, you know? The people who are more scrutinized than anybody else, they have to speak for a living, everything about their public lives is out there. You know, be honest about this kind of stuff, right? And I think it speaks, I've said before that this is just emblematic of the fact they're all a bunch of low-grade liars and the public sees that. I think it's worse. I think we've all noticed the decline in quality of politicians over the last few decades. I don't think it's just that, oh, it always was better back in my day fallacy. I really think it's true that the quality has gone down, and we can talk about perhaps the reasons for that, but the quality has definitely declined, and you can see that in the quality of governance. And that's why these people who work for a few years, not very impressively, get a sniff of a safe seat, drop everything, in Rachel Reeves' case, rushing up to Leeds to get that. In the business secretary's case, Jonathan Reynolds didn't even bother finishing his solicitor training before he was rushed into a safe seat. He's lied about being a solicitor when he was just a trainee. But they're doing this because they're not high quality people, and they realise that the people of yesteryear were very impressive, and they are terrified now that they're just little minnows and they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, do you know, I couldn't agree more, actually, especially in the Labour Party. When you look at the people who are politicians now and you remember some of the great and the good of previous decades, and you just think, oh my goodness, is this a reflection of the deterioration of society at large, or is it just something that's gone on in politics where nobody wants to work in it anymore? If you've got half an iota of sense, you go off and be an entrepreneur or a high-paid lawyer or something else. You don't mess about on the green benches because, frankly, you don't get anything done anyway. Now let's talk about Ed Miliband's vow that Britain will see a green jobs bonanza. Well, Tony Blair's think tank has basically said that's a load of absolute BS. The green economy is more likely to employ just 350,000 people, barely enough to offset the decline in carbon-heavy grey industry. So basically, even the best-case scenario from the Tony Blair Institute basically says that all the industries and manufacturing we're killing off with net zero and the job losses that's going to entail are not going to be filled by these so-called green jobs. But I want to know where these green jobs are even going to be, you know, where are they? Because as far as I can tell, one of the first things that Rachel Reeves did was fly over to China to beg them to make all of our windmills and solar panels for us.
Yeah, you notice, so regular listeners with a keen ear will notice that we've sagged there very subtly from the low quality of useless Labour cabinet politicians to a story about Ed Miliband. Very subtly done from us there, I think. You know, this is a guy who just lives in cloud cuckoo land, right? When he was the leader of the opposition, you know, I won't take the mick out of him remembering about how he couldn't even eat a bacon sandwich. You know, he was asking behind closed doors, why do these businesses need to pay this money on these dividend things? What are they? Why do we need to do that? Right. There's story after story that shows that he is just a complete policy wonk, nerd, strange chap who's never had a real job. Again, Rachel Reeves is the only person I think in the entire Labour cabinet who's ever worked for a profit-making entity for any length of time at all. And it turns out that Ed Miliband has absolutely not the faintest clue about how the global economy works, about how energy works, and would rather listen to a Swedish schoolgirl who likes to poo in a bucket going across the ocean rather than taking an aeroplane, Greta Thunberg, than listen to actual business people who know how the world works. Is it any wonder we've got the most expensive energy in the world and that we were, I think, energy factory away from a blackout over Christmas?
I literally said to my neighbours yesterday, my brother was over as well, I said, we've got the most expensive energy in the world. And they went, do we? Like, do we? And I was like, yeah. And like, in the world? And I'm like, yeah. And they just said, whoa. I mean, this is the absolute mental thing, isn't it? And I love the fact America are calling out Europe on basically, at the 11th hour, we're about one hop, skip and a jump away from absolute all-out catastrophe and the end of Western civilization over in Europe. And you've got J.D. Vance and you've got Donald Trump and they're all lining up and Elon Musk to say, can you just get a grip? And I think net zero encapsulates this perfectly. But you've got Ed Miliband still strumming away on his ukulele in some sort of, you know, wind farm. And Sir Keir Starmer thinking that you can turn farmland into solar farms and as if a panel makes a good sandwich. And all the while, you've got China building all the coal-fired power stations to make the green technology to sell to the West while laughing behind our backs, probably to our faces, quite frankly, and America going drill, baby, drill. And you're like, we only ever contributed less than a percentage of carbon emissions anyway. Now no one gives us stuff anymore about net zero. It now looks utterly moronic to cling to this idea that we can destroy our entire economy, destroy the lives of our citizens, freeze our pensioners, decline our available food supplies, and go, there you go. We've saved the world, aren't we, Great Britain? It's just madness. It's mental illness now.
Yeah, you're completely right. I mean, I think it is a suicidal ideology at the end of the day. You've got at least the Green Party, who are, by the way, not green at all. They're basically just kind of green communists. They are at least vaguely honest about what they want Britain to look like. You know, when their last manifestos, they had what they called the Beyonce tax, because you shouldn't have foreign artists flying over here. We should just encourage, ukulele strummers and weird interpretive dance around the campfire and all that stuff. They're also just actively degrowth in various ways. They want people to be poorer because they think that's better for the environment. They're dead wrong on that, of course. You look at somewhere like Norway, right? As you get richer there, they've got, all the oil that they've been pumping out, but they get richer and richer and richer and can then spend that on healthier alternative sources of energy. That's the way that we're going to do it here. Rather than by, as you say, impoverishing ourselves and making ourselves dependent on a literal genocidal communist regime in China,
right,
we should be investing in the cool next generation technologies that seem a bit sci-fi right now, but that really are going to change the world, right? So windows here next to me, you could turn windows into solar panels. The road outside, you could turn that into solar panels that the car would just be able to suck the energy up. You can suck carbon out of the air. All of this exciting new technology is just around the corner now, and yet we're not rich enough to be able to pay for any of it because Ed Miliband says you've got to sleep in the cold and the dark. Yeah,
right, exactly. It is absolutely moronic. We could be drilling, pumping, and getting good old cash money, being self-sufficient and become an exporter, use all that gorgeous money to build hospitals, schools, invest in the technology of the future, and actually do what we've done for centuries, which is actually be at the forefront of innovation. We are the country that basically bought the world televisions, telephones, computers, the internet, vaccines, steam engines. I mean, it's amazing what Britain has done in the past for our tiny little island nation until these bozos came along and decided they wanted us to be in a doom loop of forever decline. Right now, I am so sick to death of 2-bit, no one knows you, no one cares, no one in any other country even gives an iota if you exist or not. Politicians going about on the world stage thinking that people should listen to them. The latest candidate, because normally this is not Keir Starmer, what's he called? Sadiq Khan. God, they're all the same, aren't they? It's normally Sadiq Khan who does this, grandstanding on the world stage as if he's Emperor Almighty of Europe. No, today it's the Sinn Féin leader, Mary Lou McDonald. Everyone in America is going to be like, Mary who? She said she's not going to attend an event at the White House that she's been invited to around St. Patrick's Day. Oh, right, you've been invited because you're a Mick. I get it now. Over a principled stance against the threat of mass expulsion of the Palestinian people from Gaza. What's that got to do with anything? What's that got to do with the price of eggs?
I mean, where to even start with this? I don't want to offend the many wonderful Irish listeners that you'll have, British, Irish, the fact that our two countries are so closely connected in terms of blood and culture and language and all these sorts of things. But there is a strain that does run through, it seems, the Irish psyche with some people. I don't want to overdo it, but the fact they want to connect themselves to these kind of victim grievance conflicts around the world. How could anybody want to associate themselves with the Palestinian cause after what we saw yesterday? We saw Hamas literally playing upbeat, bright music and parading the corpses, the remains of small children, babies, right, they had kidnapped and murdered after hiding them in their disgusting little cowardly terror tunnels underneath Gaza, paid for, by the way, with money from people like Britain because we're so bloody generous when it comes to giving out charity, even to evil causes like that. Why and how could you ever associate with this? It is pathetic.
Well, it turns out Mary Who McDonald, ain't the only one who's protesting by not going to a nice little party at the White House, because Northern Ireland's First Minister now, Sinn Féin Vice President Michelle O'Neill, has announced she will not attend the White House for these St Patrick's Day events in protest at the US administration's stance on Gaza. Do you know what? I think on reading that news, Trump and Vance will just be like, great, stay back in your rainy little country then. We don't want you anyway, you absolute jerk.
Yeah, that's right. Who on earth would want to go to a party with these sorts of people? And by the way, this is just wider a symptomatic of a wider problem, that people on the left are sanctimonious and hypocritical and boring. You don't want to be at parties with them anyway, right? At least those of us on the right, we might be a bit loony in some things and all the rest of it. But you go down the pub with people like you and me, Alex, and you know you're going to have a good time. You're going to have a bit of banter. You're going to disagree about things in an agreeable manner, and that's fine. I don't want to go to a party with anybody who associates with Palestine or with Sinn Féin, frankly. They can all sit in some miserable rainy corner.
It's this sheer egomaniacal side to this, where it's like, I'm going to punish you by not attending your party. It's like, no one cares if you came or not. The invitation was sent out of protocol, mate. You're not exactly sparkling company. Get over yourself. Now, I've got a funny message for you here, James. Karen has just messaged saying, is James Price a total doppelganger for Jack Whitehall, or is it just me? No, it's just you, mate.
I've been called a lot worse. It's better than being compared to Kim Jong-un without the beard, but...
Oh, is that what you look like when you're beardless?
It's been accused me in the past, but I'll take Jack Whitehall. I was hoping for Clooney, but I'll take Whitehall.
I can't see it even slightly. I'm sorry, James, but I mean, I actually think James Price is better, and James Price is an upgrade on Jack Whitehall, is what I personally think. Thank you ever so much, Mababa, and I'm sure we'll be catching up very soon. Now, keep your thoughts coming in about who James Price looks like and your ideas and opinions on the state of the West. 03444 991 is the number to call. We're going to be taking some calls after this break. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp message, or indeed leave me a sweet little dinky voice note which we can play out on air. 8722 is the number to text. Remember to write the word talk before your message, and we're on X at talkTV. I am back after this, and I hope to hear from you. People who have a slightly delicate constitution when it comes to, let's say, expressive language. If you felt, rather off-put if you're having your cornflakes at the lovely voice note from Sean earlier, we do sincerely apologise. Those of you who have a sterner constitution who might have found it funny, well, there you go. But one must say these things when you're under the ever-watchful guardianship of Ofcom. OK, let's now get to what is going on in the land of geopolitics and catch up with our good friend Andrew Fox, defence expert and research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Andrew, great to have you on the programme.
Hi, Alex. How you doing?
Very, very well. Now, shall we start off with the ongoing, well, I don't really know what to call it, the ongoing pantomime of this deal with Putin over what happens in Ukraine? Everyone's sort of at first welcoming Donald Trump when he said, I'm going to go and have dialogue. I mean, at least I was. I thought, you can't carry on with this nonsense with European leaders on one hand saying something must be done, but being unwilling to do anything themselves. The divisions and the prevarication that has essentially created a war that has, wow, now killed upwards of 1 million people. And I thought, OK, yeah, bringing peace as a starting point is great. But then some of the rhetoric coming out of the White House seems a bit, well, even more Trumpish than Trump would normally be. And Musk has jumped on the bandwagon now and claims Zelensky runs a fraud machine feeding off the dead bodies of soldiers and is despised by the Ukrainian people. Is he?
No, not at all. His approval ratings still sit comfortably above 50%. We're in a very strange place where we have the White House nakedly parroting Kremlin disinformation lines. It's a genuinely scary and terrifying time. This could go so horribly wrong, ending in a greater conflagration than we're even seeing now. Some of the plans briefed are just startling in terms of allowing Russia to keep the gains they've made, in terms of fixing European or British troops down on that southern border, whilst Americans withdraw from the Baltics. It creates a very clear pathway for Russia's next move. And it's just staggering. Trump has decided to cozy up to one of the world's very worst dictators, and in doing so, utterly demean Zelensky, who, quite frankly, is an absolute hero. It's insane, absolutely insane.
A counterpoint to this, just to sort of balance things out a bit. Let's talk about some of the things, because we don't know what the final point of this deal is going to be. It seems to me that Trump's approach is very much, I'd say, that of let's say a narcissist, which is love bombing, trying to, ape somebody's language, showering them with gifts and praise to get them on side to reel them in. And then you go, and once you've got them under your control, you do the dirty on them. And let's hope that that is what it is. But we are hearing other things, and we have in the past heard things that might give us a degree more reassurance. So one is that it's now sort of squeaked out of the White House that perhaps one of the backstops that America could provide would be if Russia dares to set one foot inside Ukrainian territory or do one sort of mildly belligerent act, it would result in automatic Ukrainian membership. So at one point, you're not sort of traversing a Putin red line that wouldn't get him to the table of saying Ukraine must be in NATO right away, but saying, OK, the threat is if you do a single thing, then that will happen. There's also, I'm not so cynical about the idea of America saying to Ukraine, right, we want 50% of your mineral assets. I mean, that's, that is the game of geopolitics in this day and age. The West needs to get hold of these resources. America's spent a heck of a lot of money on arming Ukraine. But also, I kind of think if America had all the assets and interest in those assets in Ukraine, and that is also what Russia wants, if Russia tries to go after them, they are facing off directly with America. And then, of course, it's the fact that a month ago, Putin said quite clearly, not Putin, sorry, because it's easy to muddle them up. Trump said quite clearly, look, we are going to drill, baby, drill. We're going to use that to really drive down the cost of gas and oil. We're going to hammer Russia with sanctions. And actually, since Trump has come into office, more countries are abiding by the sanctions than they did under Biden. So maybe as horrible and as ugly some of the things being said in the public domain are, perhaps in the long run, this isn't going to be the disaster that we started to think it might be.
No, I don't agree with that position. I think it's deeply naive to assume that Russia is just going to fight this war on a military-only basis. And we've seen a very clear pattern of how Russia begins its aggression. And this deal does nothing to address the disinformation. It does nothing to address the political subversion that we're seeing. It does nothing to address the sort of the little green men, as they're known, the ununiformed soldiers that cross the border and start perpetrating acts of violence on second countries. It also, I think there's an argument that Mr. Trump is trying to somehow cleave Russia away from China, and that's just not going to happen. The White House has to have an election every 4 years. China is constant. The Russians will know that it could easily turn on them in Washington in short order, whereas China are stable and will be an ally forever. So I think that's very naive as well. And then just to address one point you raised, that half of Ukraine's natural resources is an obscenity. It's a higher reparation than we inflicted on Germany at the Treaty of Versailles in 1918 after World War One. It's absolutely naked banditry by Mr. Trump, and no country in the world could be expected to give away half of their natural resources, especially when they need them to make money to rebuild after being the victims of an appalling war of aggression. So that's a truly terrible idea.
Well, also, normally the reparations are taken from the aggressor, not the one who has been invaded, of course. Always do try, I like to play devil's advocate, though. That is my job here in the hot seat. But who's going to therefore be able to go and convince Mr. Trump that his interests are the same as ours, whatever he thinks, in the words of Macron? Because he skipped the queue. We know that Sakir Stam was desperate to be the first one over to the White House and sort of make himself look like the big I am on the international stage. And I saw a brilliant disparaging clip of Donald Trump going, well, I know he's asked to come and see me. So I said, all right, if he has to come and see me, he can come next week. Well, apparently Macron has managed to get ahead of that and will be over there 3 days ahead. But even then, I've heard Donald Trump sort of say, I don't know why he wants to come see me for unless he's got a solution to this war. I mean, it's very clear, America, when it comes to Europe, we're kind of beyond the pale to them. They're not in listening mode. They think we're just all a bunch of failed states who don't have the West's interests at heart.
Yes, I think we're at a seismic point in history here. Actually, I genuinely think it's that massive. Well, it's a new world order. We've had since 1945 the American umbrella of security over us, and they have taken far more out of it than they have given as well. We have to remember this, and the idea that we're freeloading is just ridiculous. The peace that America created, we traded that for American influence. They've had global influence off the back of this security umbrella, and they've made inordinate amounts of trade wealth in providing that umbrella. So it's a very disingenuous line from the Americans there because it now doesn't suit them anymore. But I think we're in a new era. We can't trust America as an ally anymore. They're no longer our partner of choice. And that's going to lead Europe to some very difficult decisions, which is why another reason why I think this is so foolish by Mr. Trump, because there aren't many options out there. And the obvious one is China. And we've seen with countries like Germany, with their reliance on Russian energy supply, how easily bought European leaders are. I think it's an absolute change of a generation and a very, very dangerous time.
Like, very interesting, actually. Yeah, if America's sort of trying to hold a mirror up to us and hopes that we're all going to jump to it and change our ways, certainly the forthcoming elections in Germany don't seem to be likely to go in the direction that, say, that J.D. Vance might want them to. That we might have a wedge between Europe and America, which means Europe will have to turn their attention elsewhere. Let's talk now. I mean, this is just... What was supposed to be the bodies, 4 hostages returned, none of them alive, and the bodies of those 2 little babies, the Bebas babies and their mum, in this ghoulish spectacle by Hamas. You know, really taking every opportunity to grandstand those coffins disrespectfully in front of their vile propaganda of a picture of Netanyahu with blood coming out of his mouth. And the Israelis, having done post-mortems, have said that these babes weren't killed by, you know, falling mortar. That they were killed in cold blood. And then also looking at the body of the mum and saying, this isn't her. What is Hamas doing?
It's a tricky one at this point. I mean, they've had such a clever campaign over the last 16 months in the way they've manipulated and twisted world opinion behind them. You'd like to think this is the moment where people wake up and see this group for who they really are. I mean, I have a contact close to the Bebas family, so I've been told of the details of the autopsy, and it's worse than you think, unfortunately. But yes, they were absolutely murdered. And you know, this is the moment the world should wake up and see what sort of monstrosity Israel has been facing. It brings the last 16 months into complete context. When you understand who Hamas really are, it explains why Israel had to take the military campaign it did. And yeah, I think in terms of what Hamas are trying to do, I think they're trying to project strength to the Arab world. They don't need the poor me, pity me narrative that they've been pushing at the West for the last 16 months. Now the war is at least on a pause, if not on a complete ceasefire. They're trying to show to the Arab world that they still have strength, but I think they must have miscalculated this, because even the Mufti of Saudi Arabia has condemned them. The Mufti of the UAE has condemned them. They're drawing condemnation from across the Arab world. So it's horrific, it's appalling, but I hope it is the misstep I think it is.
Yeah, how do you think Israel's likely to react to this? Because this does technically break the conditions of a ceasefire. On top of that, there have been 3 buses exploding in Israel in suspected terror attacks. One doesn't have to guess too hard to imagine who might be behind those. It seems provocative. It seems to me like Hamas is saying, come on, get back in.
Well, of course, it suits Hamas for Israel to resume firing. It means that the eye of the world goes back onto Israel. It goes back onto the narratives that they've been pushing for the last 16 months about disproportionality and genocide. And I think that must be what they're trying to do, because the ceasefire doesn't actually suit them, because they're being pressured now to actually hand over power in Gaza to someone else. Whether that's a realistic aim or not, that is the pressure that's coming. And the bigger factor here is those bus bombings were from the West Bank branch of Hamas. It wasn't the Gaza branch, it was the West Bank branch. And it brings us to the real problem at the heart of this, that Hamas is not just a Gaza organization. They have branches in Lebanon, in Syria, in the West Bank, and those branches have had huge boosts in popularity since 7th of October. So even if we do deal with Hamas in Gaza, it doesn't put an end to the situation as a whole.
Oh, well, we're going to have to end on a sad note, I'm afraid, Andrew, but it's great to catch up with you. Andrew Fox, defence expert and research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere, because I'm going to be reunited with my former television husband, Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan, to, I don't know, shout about the world. We're back after this.
I don't want any innocent civilian to die. I agree with you. I will shed absolutely no tears if Hamas terrorists die, because they live by the sword and they die by the sword. Netanyahu, I don't think, is a particularly nice person. In fact, I think he's a very corrupt person. What I do see is that there's one culture that is pretty similar to our own, that allows freedom of speech, allows people to live relatively free lives. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And then I see Gaza, and Gaza is a place that I would not want to live, or not want anyone I know to live, because there's so many problems with it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there. I am back after that little tiny advert break. I hope you made a cup of tea and you're all settled and comfortable. Or if you're driving, I hope you're doing that safely. I'm going to be joined now by my former television husband, Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan. Hi, Kev. Crosstalk.
Hello, Crosstalk. Hi, former TV wife. How are you doing?
Oh, I love it. This is actually pretty much what Kev and I do to each other all the time. It's just, you know, it's now our only way of doing a greeting. Very well.
People still stop me in the street and do that. They really do.
I love that.
We made our mark.
We need time to bring Crosstalk back, I reckon. It's had a sort of, you know, it's had a year's holiday, but I'm missing it.
Bring it back, yeah.
Now, someone who we don't want brought back is Hugh Edwards. He's been seen out and about vaping away. Still not in jail. Dodged that, didn't he, with his with those, you know, all the child abuse pictures on his phone, and still not paying back all the money he got paid in the meantime.
Yeah, it's a bit of a disgrace, really. I mean, first of all, this guy should be in jail. So wandering around vaping in Wales is a real luxury that he should never have been afforded. You know, his treatment at Westminster Magistrates Court actually lifted the lid on a scandal in this country, and that is that the vast majority of first-time paedophile offenders never go to jail, even if some of their crimes are really, really serious. And I would suggest his was. He had 41 seriously bad images of children, and some of them were in the most severe category. So I'll leave you to work out what that could have been. But you know, he should have gone to jail. But there he is, wandering around enjoying himself vaping. But it reminds us that this guy, after he was arrested back last year, the BBC pathetically allowed him to stay on the staff didn't do anything about it. And because he was on £475,000 a year, that was his salary, during this time between him being arrested and him going to court in September and being done for paedophile offences, he was paid £200,000. Now, that's £200,000 basically of every BBC licence fee payer's money, right? And the BBC sort of pretty pathetically said, well, can you pay it back, please?
Right, and he's like, why?
I don't want to side with Hugh Edwards in any kind of a way. He's a disgusting man. He's also a disgusting man that hid behind mental health issues to get out of the problems he was previously enduring. Because don't forget, he was suspended from the BBC for conducting a very, very inappropriate relationship with a vulnerable young man who was hooked on drugs, paying him £35,000 for dirty pictures. Then we found out, subsequent to that, while he was still suspended, that actually his crimes were even worse, that he collected vile pictures of kids. So this is I don't want to side with him, but if somebody said to me, you know, can you give us £200 back, £200,000 back, please? I would do exactly what he's done. No.
Also,
So
why? I mean, the fact he's just like moping around Wales vaping. If I had snaffled all that cash money, I'd just, I don't know, fly myself off to Epstein Island or something.
Well, yeah, don't forget he's on the sex offenders register. So
does that mean he can't travel?
Will be quite difficult.
Right. Oh God, we're stuck with him.
Good. But the BBC basically said, oh, yes, we're going to get our legal team in it. We're going to get this money back. They're classically, typically, they've done the square root of damn all ever since. What they should be doing is suing this guy and saying, give us back that £200,000. And while we're at it, let's have a couple of million off you for breaching your contract and bringing the BBC into disrepute.
Right. Surely that is a breach of contract.
How hard is bloody backbone. The state broadcaster is like a jellyfish. It's pathetic. And the Director General, Tim Davie, is the latest in a long line of losers who are running the once great BBC right into the ground.
Now, Kev, one of the big stories circulating in the world of sort of entertainments, if you will, which used to be an entertainments correspondent. Me, I don't even know what entertainment is because I'm a sado who does cryptic crosswords and is obsessed with politics.
Oh, I remember that.
I know. You miss sitting next to me while I'm doing my cryptic. You're like, give us a clue, and then you're just like, no, don't bother.
Well, I'm useless at crosswords, but go on. Right,
now, I'm useless at blimmin' films, but apparently James Bond now is going to be owned by Amazon, which when I read that, I was just like, oh, right, okay, that's, yeah. But you know, Nicholas loves a bit of James Bond, is a bit of a film buff. He's like, this is really bad. It's going to be like, you know, the end of a whole British brand and all these things that have been treasured and preserved, like a little time capsule of culture in this country, will suddenly become Tom Cruise, you know, jumping out of a helicopter instead.
Well, I think this is kind of worrying. I mean, yes, the franchise, the incredibly valuable James Bond.
For patients, because patients, if they are concerned about their doctor and they want to look at his or her history, they can't now have access to that doctor's history. They can't see online, for example, whether they have suspensions or complaints against their name. And they also can't request a doctor of a certain sex, because they may say, well, I'm female, I want a female doctor. And they'll go online and it will say that the doctor they're having is female, but it's only because it's a male doctor who's changed into female. So this is just opens up all sorts of risks, actually, and I can't believe it's happening.
I mean, I don't even understand the thought process behind this. As if, you know, if you were a man and now you want to identify as a woman, you've changed completely into a new human. You've been through some sort of magical metamorphosis, and perhaps the fact that you did all these dreadful things as a doctor beforehand was because you were fighting this gender battle in your mind. I can't even begin to fathom the logic behind any of this. But thankfully, one might say, Wes Streeting, who is Health Secretary, has said that trans doctors' disciplinary history must not be erased, so a beacon of common sense there. But can you explain to me who's behind this sort of concept and why anyone would even give this credence?
Well, this is the General Medical Council have done this. And I think it is exactly what you say. I mean, it's quite unbelievable, but there is an idea that if you change your sex, you are changing into a whole new person. I mean, it's remarkable, but it's very concerning because we do know, for example, so there's 62 doctors working in the NHS who have, according to the General Medical Council, have changed their sex, and we can't, as patients, we don't know about it. But what we do know is that, for example, male prisoners in prisons have far higher rates of committing sexual offences than the general, who say that they're transgender, right? Male prisoners who say that they've changed sex or that they're trans women, they have far higher rates of committing sexual offences than the general prison population. We also know that men who dress as women or say that they are transgender, there's a proportion of those men who are likely to be suffering from paraphilias like autogynephilia or exhibiting other sexual fetishes. These men do pose a risk to women in a way that ordinary men maybe don't, okay? So we now have male doctors who could say that they're women, and they may well have had complaints against their name from women who were concerned about inappropriate behaviour, and now that would also be scrubbed if they had said that they've changed their gender, and they don't need to undergo gender reassignment surgery or anything. They can just say that they've changed gender. I mean, it feels like a conspiracy theory, but it's real.
One assumes, and let's sort of break that down a bit, because paraphilias, autogynephilia, let's just explain that for people going, you what now? Paraphilias are sort of like, let's say, coexistence perversions, for want of a better word, fetishes, and autogynephilia being one of them, which is sexual arousal from dressing up as a woman, essentially. It's not just something you do because you think you're a woman, you do it because it gives you a kick. I think it's never really been publicly stated, no research, because research is way too taboo, the percentage of men who say they're dysphoric, who actually are, in fact, people with paraphilias and autogynephilia. I would imagine the percentage is pretty high. And so you're basically saying someone who gets sort of strange sexual arousal from pretending to be a woman or accessing women's spaces can then, if they've done anything weird, have their record wiped because they've changed gender as a woman, which would then give them even more access to those women's spaces.
Yeah, and the NHS is facilitating all of this. This is what's so concerning. And I do appreciate, Wes Streeting coming out and saying that this is a problem, but, what is he actually doing about it?
Right.
He talk, but I don't see any politicians, making any changes within the NHS. DEI is still very much rife across the NHS. Wes Streeting recently said it's gone too far. Well, okay, but these roles are still there, and none of this stuff is being rolled back on. And as you say, it puts women at risk. It's really concerning. It's really actually quite perverse and quite dark. And we're allowing men to essentially play out their sexual fetishes in the public space, with patients and people who are going to be at risk, like the case of the recent case of Dr. Upton, a male doctor who says that he's female, who's then started using female changing rooms and making women feel very uncomfortable. I mean, I don't know enough about him, but he may well be suffering from a paraphilia like autogynephilia, and he's being allowed. The NHS is essentially collaborating with him and allowing him to do that.
This is what is just so extraordinary in all of this. Amy, thank you ever so much. You've done such brilliant work in this particular space, and thank you so much for helping me make that documentary, but with the brilliant New Culture Forum. That's Amy Gallagher, ladies and gentlemen. Right, let's do some of your messages. Sarah says, we need more like these countries who would punish their criminals, not protect criminals from them. Who's protecting us from monsters? I mean, I think we're talking there about whether we should be deporting a Sri Lankan who is a paedophile back to Sri Lanka, who may well just punish him for that. Morning, Alex. Love your passion for common sense and fairness. Get rid of the axis of evil, woke Islam and net zero. Sorted, says Peter in Lincolnshire. Well, that's a big job for anybody. Alex Phillips, the spats between Trump and the UK president. Well, the showman and the great President Trump is trying to push the UK president behind him in the lineup for the Nobel Peace Prize. Starmer needs to come home and practice being the Prime Minister he's being paid to be. Yeah, I mean, I had a long conversation with a friend of mine who was former deputy director of the Pentagon, global operations at the Pentagon yesterday, and he said to me, don't think for 1 minute that Trump is on Putin's side. This is play, and the rhetoric is being done very deliberately. And he actually kind of wants to panic Europe and Europe to go, that's it, we've lost America, and start standing up for itself again. And maybe that's just going to happen. Lisa says, I find it somewhat ironic that Mary Lou McDonald and Michelle O'Neill, the political wing leaders of the murdering terrorist organisation, the IRA, are not going to the USA in protest of Gaza. What a laugh. I thought that myself, actually, Sinn Féin's historic ties to a sort of terrorist organisation. But perhaps that is exactly why they have sympathy for Hamas. Let's be real. OK, let's speak now to Andrew, who's in Hertfordshire. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, how are you? How's your day?
Well, it's very well. It's nice to be asked that for once. Are you going to interview me? Shall I sit back and relax a bit and let the boot be on the other foot?
Yeah. Look, I think we're really in a difficult time with this scenario with the energy.
Right.
The root cause of any good growth in an economy is cheap resources, and energy is a resource. I stood in a field with a farmer, and you know farming types, and there was a pylon there. And he said, do you know how tall that is? It's 120 feet. So in this country, we have to replace every pylon to carry the new cables for electricity.
Right. I didn't know that.
But think about this. Each one of those pylons needs energy for the concrete, for the steel,
right,
and for all the component parts.
Yeah, ironically, where's that steel going to come from? Probably not from South Wales.
Yeah, not at all. So the actual capital cost of going green is exponential because the price of steel is going up. Have you any idea how much concrete it takes to build the platform for the pylon to stand on, which is going to be taller and heavier?
Funny you ask that, Andrew, because I know the exact amount by litre. I'm telling a lie, of course I don't. But I'd imagine it's a lot.
Oh, it's phenomenal. So the actual policy is ridiculous. So at its core, what we have to do is turn the country around. You've been talking to military people. Spend 8% on our military capabilities, 1% on foreign aid, and we need to kickstart the economy by basically pumping or fracking for gas and oil.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we can do.
And we know, actually, that does create a lot of jobs. I mean, traditionally in Scotland, the oil industry has created a load of jobs that they basically are now losing. And when you look at the possibility of fracking, and there's so much... I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't sound like a good word, does it? It sounds a bit grim, fracking. If it was something delicate... You know, when they like something in this world, they give it a nice little PR makeover. They give it new terminology, don't they? Like top surgery rather than lopping your boobs off. But when they don't like something, instead of calling it the delicate extraction of light gas from underneath our land, whatever they might call it, a sort of vital gas extraction operations, it's called fracking. But the thing is about fracking, you know, when people say, oh, it causes earthquakes, it causes the equivalent of a little rumble of a double-decker bus going past at the very worst. And then people go, yeah, but, you know, once you've got all of this fracked gas, it's then got to be taken in heavy gas tankers around the place. OK, so what about solar panels and what about wind turbines? Do they just sort of come down from heaven in a sort of god beam from the clouds? These things also have to be transported around the country. And also, oh, well, you know, it's so bad for the environment. You do realise that most of the time, about, you know, 50 to 70% of our grid is still dependent on gas, and we're actually having to put it in massive tankers and bring it through from countries like Qatar, which costs even more when it comes to the environment. So, you know, I could riff on this all day, but you know what? Some people might say it's a load of hot air, so I'll do my thing for climate change and end there. Andrew, thank you ever so much. That was Andrew in Hertfordshire. We've just had a bit of breaking news now, which is the BBC have been forced to pull that controversial Gaza documentary off iPlayer after it's slammed as a propaganda tool for Hamas. This is after it was exposed. This was some sort of BBC great idea of let's give kids a load of cameras to report how terrible life is inside Gaza. Well, OK, that's very BBC. Like, look, there he is. There's a young whippersnapper touring the mean streets of Raqqa, looking at all the rubble. The thing is, though, some of these kids involved in the making of this documentary happen to be the children of Hamas. That's right. And so do you imagine for any minute now that they're not thinking this is a great opportunity to do our propaganda and show everyone how terrible it is over in Gaza? That looks all right, that beach, doesn't it? But look, it's a war zone. We know that war zones are brutal. We know that war zones are horrific places to be. We know that war zones are unpleasant. And, you know, that's got to be expected if you've got a camera inside. Or, to be honest, I'm looking at these pictures shown right now, and it actually looks blimmin' nice. I feel like going on holiday there, truth be told. Look at that lovely beach. Oh, blimey, do you know what I'm thinking? I'm beginning to think, where did that idea go of, like, the sort of Gaza on the Med new holiday resort? That sounds nice quality, that. Anyway, sorry to go off on a tangent, but anyway, that documentary, which people have accused of being Hamas propaganda, has now had to be taken down of BBC iPlayer, so I think we know who won that argument. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but after the break, we're going to be looking ahead at the German elections, which are taking place this weekend. A seismic moment, some are saying, in the future of Europe, an indicator of whether Europe is listening to America and getting its act together. I think not. So we're going to be joined by a great friend of mine, political theorist Ralph Schulhammer, after this.
I think he's tried to express how he really feels without sort of causing any kind of diplomatic problems. He doesn't believe that Zelensky's a dictator, that he does think that there should be elections there at some point soon. And, you know, don't take Trump too literally, but do take him seriously. Serious political parties don't just mouth off. You know, they really have to consider their position before putting out statements on issues as tremendously delicate and complex as this one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Now, I saw a brilliant clip from CPAC. This is the big sort of a Glastonbury of right-wingery that happens every year in America. It used to just be American speakers, and then Nigel Farage broke the trend about 7 years ago and was invited to go to CPAC after Brexit. And now they get the great and the good of the right wing from around the world. Anyway, I was indulging in watching some of the interviews and presentations given last night, and there was a great interview with J.D. Vance, who basically said, you know, when you look at the German military, we are propping this thing up to the tunes of, you know, millions, billions of American dollars. We have American air bases over in Germany. We have helped Europe incredibly over the decades. And we're looking at Europe going, you ain't helping yourself. And what's more, you're dragging down the entirety of the West. We've had our moment of civilizational reckoning in America where we've gone, we cannot afford the net zero, DEI, open border, constant decline, erosion of society, mental health permacrisis that America had become. We're changing and changing now. And then they've looked over the pond at Europe and gone, blimey, we thought we were in a bad way. Look at them. Terrorist attacks every 5 minutes. 2 gang rapes a day in Germany as a result of mass migration. Stabbings all over the shop. Pakistani rape gangs stalking the streets of northern England. And, you know, a net zero campaign, which is impoverishing Germany. You've turned off their nuclear power stations, slow clap. And they've just said, look, if you're not going to help yourself, and the only way we're going to save the West, quite frankly, is helping yourself, then we're just going to have to cut you off because you're a bit like a verruca at this point. And so I think the big political test coming up for Europe is going to be the German elections this weekend. And you'd think, aha, this is the opportunity, because, of course, we know that Elon Musk loves the AfD. We know that J.D. Vance loves the AfD. We know that the AfD love borders. That's right. And this is what the populations across Europe are crying out for. And America's saying, Europe, you must listen to your people. But it's not really going to work out that way in Germany, is it, Ralph Schulhammer?
Hey, Alex. Good to be back.
Hey.
Well, I listened to J.D. Vance's speech yesterday as well, and I mean, he's a fantastic speaker. His eloquence, like, there is no stuttering, there is no reading off a script. So, he's a very, very gifted politician. He's very young, so it's quite likely that we have seen the next president of the United States after Donald Trump. However, I will say one thing. American military presence in Europe is not just out of the goodness of Washington's heart. So, I mean, their geopolitical role and their ability to project power all over the globe is because they have these military bases all over the globe. So, Alex, we've talked about this many times. I support the Trump administration. I'm a huge fan of everything they're doing. But sometimes there's we are just footing the bill for everybody else, but we don't get anything out of it. That's not entirely true. Now, I agree with their assessment that Europeans have to pull their weight. I agree with their assessment that Europe has to grow a backbone, but it's been interesting to see how relations between Europe and the US would develop if the Europeans actually do grow a spine. So I'm all for it. As I said, I support the president. I support the wave of right-wing populists in Europe. But new tensions will also arise from this. So we should be very sanguine that not everything is going to be milk and honey if these things should actually come to pass.
Right, and this is the thing. I mean, Friedrich Merz, who I think is sort of poised to be the winner of those elections, the one most likely to be able to form a government, considering the AfD are behind a firewall. So even if they come a resounding second, no one's going to partner with them, so they can't actually be anywhere near power. Yeah, brilliant. Slow clap for democracy there. Friedrich Merz has always been a bit of an Atlanticist. He studied in America. He's always talked strongly about wanting to work with America and even talked favourably about President Trump. But he's changed his tune now and has basically said, that's it. Our alliance is probably now over and we've got to partner elsewhere. The thing is, though, I mean, Vance does have a point, like you're saying, about the fact that Europe's been sleepwalking into disaster, into a state so perilous that, some people who are experts in the field of civil uprisings and wars and all the rest of it are saying it's on the brink of collapse, quite frankly, not just economically, but societally, if it continues down this path. And yet, because of this firewall against the AfD, Metz is probably going to have to form a coalition with far-right and hard-right and socialist parties instead. And are they going to want to change the open borders situation? Are they going to want to pull back from net zero? No.
No, because if they would want to, they could have done it during the last 4 years. But you mentioned something that's quite important and an element that very often gets lost in the debate. The idea that dominates the Trump administration, which I enjoy very much, very often right-wing government said we have to end left-wing governance. But I think what Musk and Trump are trying to do, and the entire cabinet actually, because of course it's not just Trump and Musk, is they say, no, we're not just going to end left-wing policies, we replace them with actual right-wing policies. And you saw this during the Munich Security Conference. It was not just the speech of J.D. Vance. It was also, he met with Alice Weidel, the head of the AfD, but he did not meet with the current chancellor, Olaf Scholz. And that tells you quite a bit. So it was not just that the Americans say, we would kind of like a little bit of a change in Germany. No, they actually went and said, we will talk to those who we think would be a better option. However, right. I will say one thing, because you mentioned the BBC shortly before the break. Before the German election, we had similar cases where the public broadcasters were actively trying to manipulate the outcome of the election. And to give you a quick example, they had these town halls, right, where all the politicians come and they are being faced with questions from the audience. And, the AfD always got very hostile questions, supposedly from your average Joe, from the German population. But as it turned out, in more than one case, these people were party members and sometimes actual regional leaders of the Green Party. right? And when this came up, they said, oh, this was a mistake. We are so terribly sorry. It could happen to everybody. But it always happens in one direction, right? Whenever something like that happens, and you see it in the UK as well, you saw it in the United States, whenever somebody who's supposedly a neutral observer is interviewed, what you also said about the BBC and the documentary in Gaza, then it turns out that it's a member of Hamas, or it's in this case, it's a member of the Green Party. So what we see here is the attempt, and I think we're going to see it in other European countries in the future as well, including the UK, by the very often taxpayer-funded media to put their fingers on the scale. And that is a problem. That is a form of manipulation. And it always bothers me. When Elon Musk says, vote for the AfD, it's, you cannot say this, and he's interfering in the German election. But if the taxpayers have to pay for the public broadcasters to lie to them in order to blackmail and persuade them to vote for everybody but the AfD, we say, well, these are just mistakes that happen in a democracy. It's very frustrating.
It's funny that you say that, because I was listening to the BBC this morning, as sometimes I want to do. Was it last night? It's either a podcast, I don't know. I was listening, it was definitely BBC related. And two things, it really hit me between the eyes. One was that apparently I heard this statistic that, Germany's still reeling that Trump is president of America, because in a survey before the American elections, 88% of the German population were convinced it was going to be Kamala Harris. And I thought to myself then, what on earth are your news programmes broadcasting to you? Because for us, it was pretty clear. There were some deluded people who thought, it's going to be Kamala Harris. But most of us sort of thought it was a surefire bet it was going to be Trump from a long way out, let alone 88% of Germans being deluded into thinking it was going to go the other direction. But also I noticed the BBC have sort of started to trip over themselves of whether they should call the AfD far right. You actually hear them having sort of little miniature soliloquies now in their intros going, the right wing, some say alternative right, some say extreme right, some say far right. I mean, the definition, the words we should use has really been up for debate. I'm like, you shouldn't have used them all along. Just say right wing. It's fine. It covers all bases. But the problem we have here, I mean, how is it, Ralph? How is it? How are other countries saying this is democratically tolerable, right? For a party in a developed nation, which is doing really well, which is soaring in the polls, which the vast amount of voters wants to see in power, is being deliberately excluded from being near power. That those people who don't want to sort of share its policies will go so far as to say absolutely nobody, they'll say it publicly, nobody must do a coalition with these people who want to protect our borders. I mean, if this was any other country, if we were looking at, say, an African nation where there was a president of Africa who was sort of facing challenge by a brand new party and the incumbent was going, whatever happens, we're not going to share government with this person, these people, we'd be saying, whoa, you're a tyrant. You're going to cause an uprising in your country. You're going to have to learn to power share. And yet in Europe, these things happen and everyone just goes, well, it's got to be done, doesn't it? Because they're all so very wicked, these populists.
What I think the main distinction is, and we don't talk about this often enough, the supposed threat to liberal democracy that these new parties are is a little bit a sleight of hand. Because they are not a threat to liberal democracy, they are a threat to liberalism's democracy. And that's a key distinction. Neither the AfD nor any other right-wing party wants to establish a dictatorship, a new Führer that then leads the Germans to war or anything like that. But they want a government that is not defined by the progressive visions of contemporary liberalism. But the liberalist movement was clever enough to say, if we just say that our position is the center position, the rational position, the liberal position, then people will just imbue it into the way in which they speak. They basically dominate the conversation. And this is the trick that they did very well, because they simply mixed up the terms liberal and liberalism. To give you one example, if you look at classical liberals, like, for example, John Stuart Mill would have never voted for open borders. Right. Edmund Burke would have never voted for open borders. Right? These people were absolutely adamant about the importance of tradition, of different countries, of nationalism, of patriotism, of loyalty, that being a citizen is not just having rights, but also obligations. So the term liberal has been misused and is actually liberalism. And I reject liberalism. Right? I think it's a
total misnomer. These people aren't liberal at all. They'll shove you in prison for a blimmin' tweet, and neither are they democratic. They want to send all the power upwards to supranational organisations that are totally unaccountable and meddle with and gerrymander elections. So both, frankly speaking, are contradictions and just deeply disturbing. But this is how, like you said, they play with language. Ralph, I love catching up with you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the programme again. Right, it's time for us to take a short break. But when we come back, we're going to be be chatting to Craig McKinley, who's now a Conservative peer, all about ECHR madness, but also the perils of what sounds like a lovely thing, the EU Youth Mobility Scheme. What lies in store if we decide to enter that? We'll be discussing that after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the programme. I mean, my. Just when you think you're safe because you're not going to be able to, you know, they're never going to be able to sort of reverse Brexit. We know they want to. But actually the thing is, the Labour Party have done so many things with the Brexit dividend that the Conservatives never did. For instance, going down the route of renationalising our railways, totally incompatible with the EU's single rail directive, which wants everything to be privatised and cut up and sold to the highest bidder from an EU nation. But we said, no, we're going to take back control, right? We're going to take back control of things like our national grid. We're going to take back control of our railways, which is like the most Brexity thing you could imagine. So I kind of thought to myself, they're never going to be able to, climb back into the EU, and the EU would go, oh, that's cherry picking. But unfortunately, there's a lot of conversation about a Brexit reset. Of course there are. And you just think to yourself, you know, what we have seen in Europe, right? We look at it, and JD Vance and Trump have been calling the whole of Europe out on this. We look at what the EU did when Russia went into Ukraine. And, well, they did nothing, didn't they? The UK, because it's not tied in to the EU when it comes to decision making, said, right, we're going to go, we're going to give arms, we're going to... Where are you guys? Come on, we've got to stop Russia doing this. Come on, we've got to stop Putin doing this. And the EU's like, Germany especially, like, no, but we need to have the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And you're like, but that's buying gas from Putin, you absolute lunatics. What are you doing that for? It's like, well, come on, France, Spain, Italy, anyone with me? You want to give weapons? No, sorry, we can't afford it. Well, you know, it's not really, but if you provoke Putin, he might lash out a bit. We better wait a while. So, come on, guys, let's all put sanctions against Russia, right? Because he's just, storming into Ukraine, doing what he likes. We've got to stop him somehow. What about the sanctions? We need to think about that. Let's have a little conflab about this and see what we can come up with, what's suitable to all of us as a group of nations. It took 6 months, and then it's like, well, we might sort of apply this little punishment here, but if we do that, unfortunately, that might affect us really badly. So, yeah, Putin's not good, though. Yeah, he's not good, but not sure we can really go that far, can we? Then all of a sudden, 3 years later, when Trump comes into power and goes, do you know what? Oh, my goodness, Europe, you are a mess. You can't decide on anything. This whole open borders thing, you're just allowing people who are nutters connected to terrorist organisations to just, come in via your eastern frontier and just roam around the continent. Oh, I'm in Italy now. Oh, look, now I'm in Sweden. Ta-da! Oh, look at these dinghies being traversed all the way from China through till Germany with nobody stopping them because nobody does border checks anymore. And, you see those boats coming across the Mediterranean from Tunisia into Italy? Maloney's like, hey, I'm going to get the Italian Navy right in there to turn them around. And Ursula von der Leyen next thing comes down and goes, you cannot do that. That is my German accent for today. It's not very good, is it? But Achtung, you cannot do that. And next thing, Maloney's been battered into submission because guess what? Loads of her sovereign debts from the Eurozone crisis, which was made by the EU, not exactly by Italy itself, is tied up in the ECB. And you can imagine that Ursula would have been like, yeah, you know what? Stop talking. You try turning those boats around and all of a sudden we're going to make you default on your debt and you're going to go broke. And you think to yourself, what is it with the EU? Do they actively want to destroy the continent? And JD Vance seems to be going, yeah, you do. And what's more, we're going to call you out on it in public. We're going to make the director of that Munich Security Conference, cry on stage. We've been found out because we're really bad at our jobs. And JD Vance said dirty words. And you're like, this literally just sums up the whole of the EU. Meanwhile, we're out of it. And Starmer, for, I don't particularly praise him very often, has gone, right, we're not in the EU, let's do some cool stuff that is really socialist. Now, I don't think it's cool stuff because I'm not a socialist, but at least he's sort of gone, here's my ideology, and guess what? We can actually do our own thing in Britain. Now we're not having to follow every single EU rule. And that's what it's all about. A government comes in, they says they want to do this, and you go, no, I'm not going to vote for you. But it's not like a government writes a manifesto and says, well, all of this stuff is basically going to be up to whether Ursula von der Leyen likes it or not. And you look at this absolute mess, this economic disaster, this smoking bonfire, this catastrophic, smouldering dustbin of rubbish that is basically the conjoined European economy right now. Zero manufacturing, on the brink of recession, ruined societies because of open borders, crime everywhere, no democracy, people massively unhappy, just going to the legacy parties, get out, rouse, we don't want you anymore. And even America going like, you guys, mate, you're just shameful. You are the sort of, you are the poison bubo on the corpse of Western civilization and you need to be lanced. And then what do we have instead? What do we have in our government? Oh, it's so disastrous. I think we ought to rejoin the EU. And what's more, we need to sign up to the Youth Mobility Scheme. Because do you know what the EU has a lot of? Yeah, it's got a lot of men under the age of 30 who broke into the continent illegally and they don't want them. So if we open our borders up to people under the age of 30 in the EU, maybe we can take on some of their asylum seekers by the back door. Make it make sense. Well, that turned out to be a bit of an accidental rant while we wait for Lord McKinley, but I'm pleased to say he is going to join us after this break. But before we go to break, I'm going to tell you to listen to this, because this is your opportunity to win £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Well, there you go. Good luck if that's you entering. I always wonder who do those voiceovers, to that competition, and when they do the whole, coming up after the break, Alex Phillips. Who is that person? Why don't they have a show? OK, right, we're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, we're going to be catching up with Lord McKinley.
This bald guy with a thick facial hair and lots of wrinkles all over his face is indeed a child, and now his asylum application will proceed as such, so he will be treated as a minor. All of these cases that we talk about, they always involve the Home Office saying, no, deport this person, that person is not a child. Then the Home Office decision gets appealed against. The Home Office is not to blame here. It's another mad moron of a tribunal immigration judge.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Many people praising my German accent there. Well, I do try my best. Sometimes when I'm left to riff completely alone, strange things happen, and I don't want to be accountable for them, because all I'd say is you try sitting in this box by yourself for 3 hours and just talking non-stop. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to say. It's not always thought out. And to alleviate your pain at listening to me do the rest of the accents of the European Union and beyond, because I'm sure Ofcom does not wish me to partake upon that particular mission, let's save myself from disgrace by speaking to Lord McKinley, Craig McKinley, Conservative peer. Hi, Craig, how are you doing?
Oh, very well, Jess. Yeah, good to be on. Really good.
Brilliant. It's great to have you here. Well, I did a bit of a rant in the last segment, all about the fact that here we go. It was, as we predicted, Labour are trying to renegotiate their way back into various EU things, including net zero, which just seems absolutely balmy, considering, you know, how America's pointed the finger at us and said, you do realise you're driving your economies into the ground. But I'm very suspicious of this youth mobility scheme. It sounds nice on paper, doesn't it? Oh, all these lovely young Europeans who just want to come and pull pints and study over here. Well, if they wanted to study over here, they could do that anyway. If they had jobs to come to, surely they can get a visa and do that anyway. So what do you think's going on here?
Well, I think we're seeing many measures that are a slow backsliding of the Brexit deal. And, you know, I have to say, as a hardline Brexiteer, I supported the deal, but I think it could have been a lot better. And we haven't made the proper use of those Brexit freedoms, that's for sure. But we're seeing from Keir Starmer, and are we surprised? Because when we had the height of the Brexit wars between 2016 2019, there he was at the front of the campaign, asking for second referendums, getting back into the single market, the customs union, anything else going. So here he is now as our PM, and lo and behold, are we surprised that he's trying to backslide on many things. Now, the youth mobility scheme, I have to say, I'm probably not, and you might be surprised to hear, jumping up and down as many maybe, because that youth mobility scheme, if it is replicated with other ones that we currently have signed up to, would include places like Australia, Japan, and Uruguay of all places. If it was a similar scheme to that, then I wouldn't have too many issues, frankly. But if it's a scheme that then allows cheaper education, access to health, long-term benefits potentially, then we're in a completely different ballgame, which looks like free movement, which was one of the reasons we voted for Brexit in the first place. So, yes, be fearful, I think. Yeah. There's other arrangements afoot, which is copying all EU rules on food and SPS rules. Right. That is seriously single market by the back door.
I'm worried about this youth mobility scheme because when I look at a problem that faces all of the EU, and they very often try to make us burden share on this, it is the huge influx of men of a fighting age into various European countries. They, like us, and actually many European countries, have had an even bigger influx than we have had. And in many respects, these people have had to be quickly processed and may well now hold EU documents or the right to reside. And a lot of them will be under the age of 30. I think the average German student, you know, if he wanted to come study at Oxford or Cambridge, could do it. Otherwise, he's happy to study at the University of Munich or whatever it is. My big concern is this is just a way for the other European countries to offload some of those young men who have come in that they don't particularly want sticking around.
Yeah, I hadn't looked at it through that lens. I was looking at it through, lens of proper German youngsters, proper Greek youngsters. But yeah, I mean, just to counter that, I understand your fear, and it's obviously be something I'd be wholly against. But the prospect of being able to get a German passport in a short time would not be around the corner anytime soon to these young men, as you say, of potential fighting age. But yeah, that's a wider issue. That I'm afraid Frontex has completely failed its own borders for the EU countries, and we're going to see the whirlwind in this in elections across the whole of the EU. I've no doubt about that. And because of the failures of Frontex to not safeguard its external borders, we now have the issue, obviously, of the border crossings across the Channel. That's another issue. I mean, the bigger thing in play here is our abject failure, and I'm afraid I was part of the government that actually delivered this, was legal visas by the million. I mean, how on earth that ever happened, I frankly do not know. I really don't know. But yeah, I offered many suggestions as to how we stop the Channel trade. One of which was, perhaps Europe could enforce its own CE markings as things cross borders, because I can guarantee that those cut and shut extended dinghies do not have a CE marking. And yet we have arguments about a British sausage going into Northern Ireland, but we don't seem to have any issue about Turkish-made cut and shut expanded dinghies going across the whole of the EU, across many borders, no CE markings, no one seems to care, and here they are on our border. The other one was rather more robust, and I called it Operation C, or Plan C, and that was actually to take people straight back over the Channel on a Chinook helicopter, of which we got 42 of them, land them back at France and say, well, this was part of the deal, you're meant to stop this from happening, we're just complying with our part of the deal, because you said you'd stop this.
I don't understand that, because the people say, well, we can't do that, that would be breaking some sort of law or another. I mean, Chinook helicopter, I love the optics of that would be quite dramatic, I'm very for that. But I think that, surely you could just have, if you've got, instead of the RNLI going out to a dinghy, send out a naval vessel, pick them up and drive them over to France and go, sorry, you forgot this accidentally fell out of your country, you might want it back. But why haven't we done that? Because I just think it'd take 1 or 2 or 3 times of that happening, the ensuing argument that would happen between Britain and France, it would make international headline, and there you go. The optics have been said all around the world, you cannot come into Britain, job done.
Well, I mean, we worry about the danger and the deaths in the Channel. That would stop that. Obviously it would, because as you quite rightly say, you do this for a week and the whole trade would collapse, because it would be a route that's been closed. And the dark money that flows through this by the ton, literally it's bigger than the drugs trade, would stop. So all of that dark money would disappear, all of the people trafficking, the deaths in the Channel. I would say to that, what's not to like? Let's have the row. I mean, I just find it hard to believe that France is incapable of patrolling its own border. And when we talk about international law, what it is actually doing to us is contra to international law. It is meant, every country is meant to police its own borders. And frankly, France is not doing that. So, yeah, I frankly had enough, because I think they could do it for us. I know if it was roles reversed, we would be, I'm sure, first to make sure we were complying with international law regulations about maintaining borders, and it wouldn't be flowing the other way.
And I have a feeling the French would be sending boats back over the Channel. The French would do that. We know what they're like when they face off over scallops. Imagine what they'd be like over migrants. The French wouldn't have this. The French would be lining up fishing boats or something or the other, or the French Navy in the middle of the Channel, and sending them back to Britain. I'm pretty sure that, what you'd end up with is a boat full of migrants landing on the shores of Kent, and the French going, this came from your country.
Well, maybe the French would actually understand that the only reason a lot of these migrants are in France at all, and most certainly on the Calais side of the Channel, is because of the potential ease and availability of getting into Britain. If you were to close that route, France itself wouldn't be troubled by these migrants being there in the first place. I mean, I cannot believe what local residents in the Pas de Calais must be thinking about this trade, which seems to go on and on, year in, year out, with a multitude of people living in the woods for extended periods, trying to get across the Channel. I'm surprised, the mayor isn't up in arms with his own government, and not least the good burghers of the Calais region going absolutely nutty about this that's on their doorstep, and whatever goes on in the woods, which bears do as well. I should say. But yes, this can't continue in this manner. I think we need something more robust, and I've been campaigning for that for a very long time. And that was within a Conservative government that you expected to have an ear for these things. But I've got none of that assurance by this Labour government, who, frankly, many of its members want completely free and open international borders. I don't know why they don't come out and say it, because that's what it looks like to me. We know that's what they mean. You only have to look at the tweet output of some of their more, on the fringe left-wing members of Parliament, and you know exactly what they stand.
And this is what is astonishing, right? Because as a result of the rise of the AfD in Germany, the popularity of populism across Europe, instead what voters seem to be getting is more extreme left-wingery, because you're now having, from France to Germany, this cordon sanitaire, this firewall, as they're calling it in Germany, which is we won't do business with parties who want to close the borders, essentially, the so-called far-right parties. So instead, because we're not popular enough ourselves anymore, because voters don't trust us to do the job because we failed so miserably, we're going to cling on to power by instead joining forces with far left parties, and as a result we're going to do completely the opposite of what the public are asking and deepen the crisis. It seems to me that Europe is keen on racing us at a hurtling, race to a cliff edge, to the precipice of disaster.
No, absolutely. Well, what we're seeing across Europe, I mean, France was an example last year when they had their parliamentary elections. In the first round, you had, Le Pen's party, a right-of-centre party. I think it's possibly softened a bit from when her father ran it, but, a right-wing party clearly was ahead. And then come the second round, you had this cobbled together of the left and all other manner just to keep the right out, which obviously was the flavour of a lot of the electorate. And I think we're going to see perhaps similar playing out in Germany over the coming weeks as they try and outfox a pretty strong AfD vote. I'm sure there will be. And the electorate will get delivered a completely different government from what they thought and wanted in the first place. Situation normal, situation EU normal, where frankly, the elector's voice has got very, very little power anymore. I mean, we saw that when we were EU members. We were always outvoted on things that were important to Britain, but because of qualified majority voting, we were stuck with it. Thank God we left, ×2, ×10. But we're going to see that played out in Europe. And that's another aspect of the PR systems don't always create governments. I know we've got a very strange one on the back of first past the post at the moment. It's someone that doesn't always work properly, but it is infinitely better way of doing things because you can get shot of governments, and that's really important.
I mean, talking about getting shot of things and talking about having left the EU, and thank goodness for that, what we're seeing now is the constant, feeding into the press of the ridiculous stories of ECHR rulings and judge rulings based on migrants. We all know them by now. This rapist can't go home because he's right to a family life despite having attacked kiddies. This one can't go because of chicken nuggets. This one can't go because of spicy food. This one can't go because of now they've joined a terrorist organisation. I mean, it's just madness. It's literally trolling the British public now. And yet we've still got a Conservative Party under the leadership of Kemi Badenoch who says, well, we could consider maybe leaving the ECHR. Maybe. Why are they still so blimmin' soft on this when it is patently obvious we need to not only leave the ECHR but drag out from the roots everything that came from the ECHR and the Human Rights Act along with it? Why the Conservative Party still, feebly soft on all of this?
Well, at pains of probably getting a stiff letter from the Lord Chief Justice, I think the problem is our domestic judges as much as anything else. I mean, I was actually not standing up for the ECHR, but I was looking at what happens abroad. When there is a ECHR type judgment, or the one that was particularly came to mind was when Priti Patel did not order that plane to leave in June, God, whatever year, about 2021, because of this appeal to what they call a judge in pyjamas in Strasbourg. Now, Britain complies with 80% of those rulings.
Yeah.
Germany, 50%. Spain, a meagre 30%.
Right.
So it seems to me we are the ones that actually comply with the rulings. If you look at what Denmark is doing, Denmark has only accepted 800 refugees this last year, proper claims. So it's operating under the same ECHR framework, and yet it seems to exercise a very hefty degree of common sense.
Yeah.
What we're having here, of course, is a loss of common sense amongst our immigration judiciary. I mean, what we've heard over the last week, and thank heavens the Telegraph and others are digging this out. The most ridiculous claims. The Nigerian woman that you quoted, who joined a prescribed terrorist organisation in Nigeria. It was prescribed by the Nigerian government. And then claiming she can't go back to Nigeria because she's a member of a prescribed organisation and she'll be, perhaps put in prison. Or we had the Pakistani guy, the paedophile, who can't go home because he might be treated harshly in Pakistan because he's a paedophile. I mean, you couldn't barely make this nonsense up. And I suppose, as you said, the maddest one was the Albanian chicken nuggets are not quite to the child's flavour. I mean, this was not.
We cannot. What can we do about that, though? Because there's, as I see it, there's two things that need to happen. Both of them might be unpalatable to the wider public who don't understand this, but we got to leave the ECHR because you cannot have a court higher than your own court over in Strasbourg without any accountability. We've got to dig up all of the legislation which is now embedded in the canon of history, but we've got to somehow also clip the wings off these judges. And unfortunately, any government that dares say they're going to do all that is going to be considered a pariah.
Well, you're absolutely right. The highest court in the land should be a UK court. It can never, ever, ever be a foreign court because, last time I looked, Britain was a very civilised country. It's had a history going back centuries where human rights has been at the forefront of it. So we do not need an ECHR, and I think the madness that it's now running down almost makes it irrecoverable. Perhaps the time has come, and I'll be fully supportive of it.
This is the thing. I just worry that they're all too sensitive reputationally when it comes to what other people might say about these things, rather than standing up for the interests of Britain. Craig, I've got to leave it there. Actually, we've had a wonderful big conversation, but I've got to go to an advert break. It's been fantastic catching up with Lord McKinley there, a deserved peerage for that man who's always championed Britain. We're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, it's the final hour of this programme here at Talk, the home of common sense. Don't go anywhere. Go make a cup of tea. I'll see you after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Phillips here with you until 1 o'clock. So this means that this is now the final hour of the show and the final day in a stretch of 5 shows. But I have very much been enjoying covering Julia Hartley-Brewer from Monday to Thursday. Of course, this slot here on a Friday is mine and mine alone. You're not going to take that away from me. But Julia will, of course, be back next week from her enjoyable holiday over in the Alps. She's been sending us lots of photographs of snow-dusted peaks, trying to make us all jealous. And I'm like, do you know what, Julia? Ain't going to work. I hate skiing and I hate the cold. If you'd sent me a photo of fondue and some sort of massive glass of Glühwein, then I might have been able to stretch myself to be a little bit irritated that I'm at work. But actually, I love it here, and it's been a pleasure keeping you all company this week. Now, the story that has of course dominated the week is the ongoing heave-ho over finding a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. I've talked about this a lot already on the show, but let's have a sort of little summary, shall we? EU, Europe, absolutely useless, cozied up to Putin, did all these ridiculous self-harm policies, net zero, open borders anyway, that Putin saw as weakness. Putin exploited that, marched his tanks into Ukraine, and then only Britain went, right, we better get in there and try and stop him, while all the others were like, oh, I don't know about sanctions, oh, I don't know about giving him weapons, oh, I'm not sure we can afford that, my economy's a bit too intertwined, oh, if you put him too hard, he might react badly. And this is therefore dragged on for about 3 years because Europe has essentially done the bare minimum, sent just enough weapons to make sure that Russia can completely devastate Ukraine. You did just enough sanctions that still protected their economies. Largely, the impact was probably worse on their economies than it was on the Russian economy, who made even more money off selling gas and oil in particular than before. And then didn't bother speaking to Putin, barely could sit in the same room as each other and sort anything out. And then all of a sudden the administration changes and Trump goes, enough. Enough of this nonsense. We've been sending a load of money into what looks like a forever war, and this is going to end, and it ends now. And I thought to myself, thank goodness for that. Somebody's finally grabbing the nettle. But I think a lot of Europeans, and I'm a big MAGAite, you know that, suddenly went, ooh, when he started going, well, Zelensky's the dictator here. He should have called elections. Well, no one likes him. His polling's really bad. You started this, Ukraine. Well, you better pay reparations, Ukraine. And I'm there going, hold on. Putin invaded them. He couldn't really call elections while there's a war going on. Polling centres would likely have been bombed and Russia would have used it as a massive disinformation campaign. And, love him or loathe him, whether he's corrupt or not corrupt, I don't know. But actually, technically, his polling's not bad. It's over about 50%, which is pretty good for most leaders, especially during a war. And so, you kind of think, what's going on here? Is this a play? Is this basically to lure Putin in and get him to sit at the table, to make Putin think that America's on his side, and then all of a sudden, once he's signed on the dotted line, it'll be bam, Vlad, guess what? Sanctions. Guess what? We're going to drill, baby, drill and drive down the price of oil. Guess what? We're going to actually make sure that the assets we now part control in Ukraine are defended by Americans. I don't know. I don't know. Do any of us know the future? Well, someone who might know a bit about what the play might be and what's going on in Donald Trump's head is Jan Halberhays, because she was campaign advisor to Donald Trump and works on a task force at the US Department of Defense. The perfect person to answer my questions. Jan, great having you on the show. You'd have heard my sort of rambling introduction there. So can you just explain to me where America is at on all of this? Because people in Europe, including me, and I love the Trump, I love the Donald, are going, oh, this sounds pretty bad.
Well, let's back up a minute and let's understand a bit about how Donald Trump plays. Let's also understand how the media distorts things and always wants to create division and doesn't necessarily give the different facts. So, one, Trump had asked Zelensky for an accounting of the $350 billion that we had given, and they can only provide accounting for about $90 billion. Well, that raises a big question, especially with what's going on with Doge and Elon Musk discovering all sorts of fraud and waste and recirculating money to where it maybe shouldn't go. Donald Trump plays a long game. Now, Zelensky was all upset that he hadn't been invited to Riyadh. However, if you're going to get any concessions from Russia, you have to have a private conversation with them. You have to understand what is negotiable and what is non-negotiable. As far as the recent, he is a dictator, Zelensky should have never tweeted that Donald Trump lives in a world of disinformation, because Donald Trump won't take any of that. He'll spar back. But the other thing is that he sent over Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, John Radcliffe, head of the CIA, and Mike Waltz, head of the NSC, National Security Council, to start negotiations with Ukraine, and they put their foot down. One, they provided some documentation that they couldn't make head nor tails of and didn't elaborate on anything that they wanted. And Zelensky said he doesn't want a peace agreement. Right. So that's where we are right now.
And so do we have decent enough faith? Because I've heard this from people who are friends with Donald Trump, Americans who are actually good friends with him, who've said, don't be mistaken. He hasn't got much time for Putin. In the long term, you said he's a man who likes a long-term plan. In the long term, what he's looking at is basically outmaneuvering Russia when it comes to the energy markets and putting a massive squeeze on their economy, having access to rare earth minerals in Ukraine, beginning to see the real enforcement of sanctions against Russia and trying to cleave them away from China. And that, you know, he's not really cozying up to Putin. He's just getting Putin to the table. Is that, do you think, a fair assumption? Because everything on the outside sort of points the other direction to that from what he said, but I'm hearing from back channels that this is what's going on.
Well, Alex, I don't know why you need me, because you just said it very, very well. But I wouldn't say that Trump dislikes Putin. I think Trump wants peace. He is not a wartime president at all. And that piece is really important. You have to think about other things that Trump has said in other situations or instances, such as, we gave all this money to Iraq and we sent all these people over, but we never negotiated for oil from Iraq. So those kinds of things are part of his negotiation strategy. What I'm worried about is Keir Starmer wanting to pull NATO in. And it's going to be very interesting for us to follow their meeting next week, because I don't think Trump has much respect for Keir Starmer. And given only a third of the British population elected him, and I don't know what the percentage that is unhappy with him now, but how do you really call that much of a leader that has power? And he also comes from the World Economic Forum, the globalist mindset. And Trump really values sovereignty. He wants Ukraine to have sovereignty. When he made the comment that Russia might have to give Ukraine might have to give up a couple of regions they've captured, I think that that is a optic of how he's going to proceed in the negotiations to make Putin look good and eventually convince Putin to give them some of that back, but not Crimea. Crimea is not on the table.
So do you think, I mean, it's interesting, I love the fact you said that, you know, clearly Trump does not have much time for Sir Keir Starmer, doesn't respect him. Starmer's desperate to run over there and pretend to be the big wartime leader and the voice of Europe and the great bridge between Europe and America. It seems to me, actually, frankly speaking, in America right now, Trump and J.D. Vance don't have much time for anyone in Europe because of what our leaders have done to us.
Well, that is exactly true. And it's not hard to figure that out based on J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich conference. What has happened is that the U.S. went woke, and now the U.K. and Europe is going woke, woke 2.0. The idea of suppressing free speech is just not going to go over in the US, especially since that is so important to Donald Trump.
The risk we have here, though, Jan, I'll live with you as someone who lives in Britain. I'm kind of worried about what's now going to happen to my country because we're stuck with Sir Keir Starmer for at least 4 years, is, you know, when we look at our enemies, when we look at China, when we look at Iran, when we look at North Korea, when we look at Russia, when we now look at South Africa, have also gone a bit tonto. You know, they're all actually, and even the BRICS nations, you know, they're getting together and working together more than we've ever seen these nations work together before. They're weapons sharing, they're intelligence sharing, they're doing joint naval exercises, they're planning to sort of undercut the dollar by trading through different currencies, setting up their own bourse. They collude with each other to avoid sanctions. They think if they work collectively, because they're all basically monsters who hate the West, they can actually attack the West, and kind of what we've got as a result now. And look, I wish we weren't in a mess. I wish we could doge in Britain. I wish we didn't have a socialist bonfire of a ridiculous government in charge of us putting people in prison for social media, but sadly we do, right? And the people of Britain, like you rightly said, largely didn't vote for that. Labour got a far smaller percentage of the vote this time round, winning the election with all the seats, than they did when they lost it. But the problem is that is, you know, the reality of the situation. That's the reality of the situation for the German people as well. When you look at those elections taking place on Sunday, and no one wants to go into coalition with the AfD, so it's going to end up a centrist creating a government with a load of hard leftists who love open borders, the globalists. But, you know, the people aren't being listened to. And our enemies will be looking at this and looking at America going, OK, they're talking tough on Europe. They're telling Europe it's got to get a grip. Europe's not listening. And then the West then cleaving. If we actually do end up materially cleaving, we're going to be weaker than ever before. Is this just rhetoric, or do we know us? And when I say we, I don't mean Starmer, I don't mean Olaf Scholz and Ursula von der Leyen and all those losers who I'd like to see in the dustbin of history. But can we, the European people who don't want them and are worried and wish we could doge our own countries, have we still got America's support?
Oh, I think definitely, because given the fact that Elon is willing to put a lot of money behind a particular candidate or the Reform UK, he very much would like to see that. But I have a question. I know that MPs can vote no confidence. Can the people of Britain vote no confidence? So it is not a government of we the people.
Yeah, no, we can't do anything. Jan, we're stuck. We're in a straitjacket. The only people who can decide that the Labour Party shouldn't be the government anymore are the Labour Party, because they've got all the seats in the Houses of Parliament, and the House of Parliament can vote as a majority to bring down a government and call general elections, but they're not going to be turkeys who vote for Christmas. We're stuck with them. I don't think we can do anything. We can just sit here and wait for 4 years for a general election to be called. We can't go out on the streets and protest because we'll be put in prison. We can't moan about it on social media because we risk having the police come over to our house. So no, actually, Jan, we can't do anything. We're hostages to these mad people running the country and driving it over a cliff edge.
I think you've said that very, very well in a very dramatic fashion that I hope people listen to, because you've actually described the actions and the behavior that is going on that is making people, they're being put into an emotional and verbal straitjacket. And that is really a shame. What I'm most worried about, though, is that Keir Starmer wanting to send troops over could lead us to World War III because of Article 5 in NATO agreement. That means all the other NATO countries would have to join forces in fighting against Russia. I will tell you that America will not do that. But the other thing that Keir Starmer needs to look at is that Britain gave most of their tanks to Ukraine already. Britain doesn't have enough ammo to even fight. Why would you do this? And last night, Ben Wallace, who was former defense minister, he actually said that they put a line item in the defense budget which they took from the VAT receipts to make it sound like 3 billion was coming in. They're playing dodgy games to try to convince the public that they've got things under control, but they actually don't. And that's what we really need to start looking at. We need to wake up the British people.
Oh, don't you worry. I think a lot of us are awake. My listeners are all very alive to what goes on. Jan, one last thing before I say goodbye to you, because I've got to go to an advert break. I know America's kind of closed its doors to migrants. I know America doesn't want any more people claiming asylum. But if you had a spare room, can I come live with you?
Well, first off, I'm in the UK right now and I'm commuting back and forth.
Oh, so you know how bad it is yourself. You've seen it with your own eyes.
But I've been put forth for a full-time position at the Department of Defense. So if I end up moving, I'll make sure to get a 2-bedroom apartment.
Oh, great, thanks. I cook really well, Jan. You won't regret it. I'm not going to stab you either or make you, you know, pray to Mecca. You're safe with me. Jan Halper-Hayes, their campaign advisor to Donald Trump. What a brilliant conversation we just had. Shall we have a little voice note now and hear what Nikki has to say?
The United Kingdom is practically now Billy No-Mate since leaving the biggest trading bloc in the world. Donald Trump is practically a Kremlin mouthpiece and has gone absolutely bonkers. Oh my God. We're in a right state, aren't we?
Well, yeah, I like that. That was the most British thing, isn't it? Oh, my God, we're in a right state, aren't we? Anyone want a cup of tea? Right, go and get one then, because it's going to be an advert break, and I'll see you on the other side of this.
It's really sad that, you know, women who want to be prison officers couldn't be prison officers because, you know, that 95% of prisoners are men. But the facts are that the state's job is to keep us safe. And the men who are put in prison, we see these are often violent and manipulative men. And they will try anything to get an easy way in prison. And by you have to deal with violent men in a violent way. You have to have big, strong men to deal with them.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello hello. Do you know what? Every little advert break, Ted, my lovely little producer, comes in here, sits on a chair which is out of shot, and we have a good old natter. And he loves to, he listens to the interviews. He goes, oh, do you know what I think? And do you know what, Ted? I'm going to make you sit there and actually be my creature. You can produce at the same time. You'd make a good creature, Ted. That's what we call my comfort creatures, my emotional support animals, the people who are, as we call it in the industry, the presenter friends. I don't have one today, actually. I'm all by myself. Well, I'm not completely all by myself, am I? Because I do have you. So let's speak to you. And the first you that I'm going to speak to is David, who's in London. Hi, David.
Hi, good morning. Good to talk to you again. Look, we're big Trump fans, but last week my wife and I sat there with mouths open thinking, what drugs is he on? I mean, did you not notice the 100,000 Russian troops, tanks and everything else on the border? What I'm hoping that he's a wonderful poker player and this is all a massive ruse, and he's got it all sorted out. Let's hope so.
Yeah, do you know, this is what, I'm speaking to people who actually know the way that things work in America, and they kind of know his personality, and they're sort of saying, well, that's exactly what he is. And this is what people say about Trump. He's unpredictable. He does everything via ego. So we've all said, heard the commentator say this is how he rolls, and this is how he's rolling. But you're right, it's very... Look, at the end of the day, do I think when push comes to shove, he wants to see Europe fall to pieces? No. Does he have a brilliant understanding of European history? No. Is this actually going to shake Europe into realization that it has to actually get a grip? Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Because our worry should less be about whether Donald Trump's going to sort of, say to Putin, let's end this war. We should all welcome that peace. We should all welcome that, OK? And actually, the thing is, if you have a ceasefire, if you manage to just freeze things where they are now and the weapons, aren't being deployed anymore and there is a sort of stasis for a while, it gives everybody the opportunity to then actually get on with getting on and figure out what to do next, to actually figure out how to impose proper sanctions against Russia, to figure out how to actually make sure we're not dependent on their gas and oil, to figure out actually how they might be able to do an undercover job on him, find him in his COVID tunnel, pop one between the eyes and make sure there's a sensible replacement. It actually buys time, frankly, for the West to re-resource. We don't have the money to actually get more missiles and tanks that we apparently want to send to Ukraine. So we should all be grateful, frankly, for there being a pause in this so we can all play catch up. Unfortunately, of course, that means Putin also gets to play catch up. The problem I have is it's been very clear with America saying to Europe, you're in a mess. You're not listening to your people. And you know what? They're not listening still. And that's what I find more alarming. And, I know we all looked at the change of administration in America and saw it as a beacon of hope for us. We thought if they can do this, perhaps that's going to trigger a revolution now across Europe where we can also have a leader who stands up for us, a leader who cuts flagrant governmental wastage, a leader who wants to get rid of all the globalist left-wing ideology and make their country great again. And we thought, excellent, it's happening. The first big major economy in the West is now governed by someone who wants to do that. And we just have to hope that this sets in motion a sort of wave of revolution across the West and across Europe. And I think if that does happen, you're going to find, you already see people like Viktor Orban, love him or loathe him, saying we need to build a right-wing alliance in Europe. I'm going to join forces with Rassemblement National, AfD, Giorgia Meloni. The problem is, right, Giorgia Meloni's in power, but in France they're doing everything they can to stop Rassemblement. In Germany, the elections this weekend, they've actually said quite openly, no one's going to do a coalition. We've got a firewall against the AfD. We should be terrified, not about what Trump is saying and doing, but our own leaders. At the end of the day, they're the ones letting us down.
Well, I can't disagree with anything you said. Grab a breath. The last thing I wanted to say, I watched Question Time last night, and all the Ukrainians and everybody in the audience kept on saying how loyal they are to Ukraine, that wonderful, wonderful country. And then at the end, I was kicked in the whatnots because Fiona Bruce said, we've now been inundated with people who are here from Ukraine who said, can they stay here?
Well, you've got to expect that because their country's still at war and maybe, that happens, doesn't it? And the answer should be no, you can't. When the war's over, you've got to go home. We've loved you, we've looked after you. And you've by and large been brilliant citizens, because I haven't heard a single story of a Ukrainian causing problems because they're essentially culturally very similar to us, but rules be rules. Anyway, David, thank you for your call. We've got to go to another call now. Georgina, also in London. Hi, Georgina.
Hello, fabulous show as always. I just wanted to say that I do agree with you. Donald Trump is a controversial leader, but he does get results. But I think we do need to take a step back and take a longer look at Zelensky. The USA sent $350 billion over to the Ukraine towards the funding of this war. And now it's come to light that $175 billion of that has gone astray. Yeah. Zelensky doesn't seem in any rush to join the negotiations for a peace treaty with Russia, whilst the soldiers on both sides, Alex, are being slaughtered.
No, I know. And do you know what? I'd say this. I totally agree with what you're saying, and I agree with what Jan was saying, which is the media feeds you lies. It's more that the media just likes dumbing things down into good versus evil. It just, you know, most journalists are absolute morons. Most journalists haven't got a blimmin' clue about the world. They don't do their research. They don't read between the lines. They don't actually have sources and contacts. They're not actually going out for drinks and speaking to people who work in the intelligence agencies, who are, you know, professionals in the defence sector. They don't bother anymore. They just sit there and read a little wire and then sort of, you know, say what some other journalist has said somewhere and just follow each other like absolute lemmings. And they don't get the world at all. This is a problem. And what's happened since Russia invaded Ukraine is Russia, bad country, yes. Putin, evil, yes. Goes into Ukraine, therefore poor Ukraine isn't an awful thing. Well, yes, it is. But as a result, we kind of beatified Ukraine. We've sort of turned Ukraine into this sort of wonderful country that was so democratic and peaceful and free and progressive, and then bad old Putin comes in and calls a lot of them Nazis and starts a sort of horrible war. Well, Ukraine was riddled with a lot of problems. It was. Yes. It was, and you know, what I'd say about Zelensky is you're in the middle of a war, money's coming into various government departments, it's supposed to be going here, there and everywhere. You're going around the world trying to get more countries to give you money and expecting your people below you to be dealing with this situation, getting the arms, getting the weapons, getting the aid to where it needs to be, equipping the soldiers. But if you are a nation where there's been for a long time endemic corruption, which there has been in Ukraine, some of that stuff's going to go missing. And it seems to me the big problem we now face is when all of this is fully doged and it's in the process of happening, Ukraine aren't going to look good. And that's just going to make things a lot more difficult. Georgina, thank you, my darling, for your call. And thank you to David before. Georgina, both from London. Love having a little London audience. Now, before we go to a break, it's time to find out how you could be with a chance of winning £1 million. No, that's what Kev O'Sullivan said. If only. £25,000 still worth pitching for.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Well, there you go. Good luck to you. If you're entering, I could do with 25,000 quid. I think I'd go on a year-long holiday somewhere sunny and just, you know, Zoom call Kev's show from time to time. Right, OK, going to take a short break now. But when I come back after the break, we're going to be looking at the benefits crackdown that the Labour government say this country so desperately needed. Well, it does. But are they really going to go far enough? Are they going to doge the welfare state? I won't hold my breath. That's coming up after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Now, I'm pretty sure that most of you listening think we've got a ridiculously bloated welfare state. There are far too many people who probably could work who are not working. Far too many people gaming the system. Far too many people on long-term sick who actually might benefit from being able to go into work. And perhaps far too generous welfare to people who might not deserve it. But at the same time, I think there'll be a lot of people listening who will say that actually those people who do deserve welfare do deserve the dignity of having enough to live and don't deserve to be pointed the finger at and suspected and spied on. So how do we deal with a benefits crackdown? Are the Labour government going to be going far enough? Well, one of the proposals that has squeaked out from number 10 is benefits claimants could be forced to open up their bank accounts to the government under plans being explored by ministers to crack down on fraud in the welfare system. I'm joined now by Angela Knight, a woman that I adore. I wish she was our next Margaret Thatcher, former Treasury Minister and ex-Conservative MP. It's great to have you back on the programme, Angela. Now, tell me this. I don't like the idea of governments being able to sniff around and snoop in anybody's bank accounts. That gets a bit Chinese Communist Party. But what we have seen is people from Albania, for crying out loud, creating gangs, coming over, exploiting our welfare system, making fake accounts and sending... I mean, we don't know the millions that they managed to defraud the welfare state from. So what can we do?
Yes, well, I quite agree with you, because when I read it the first time, I thought I can't agree with this. And also it's passing a bit the buck to the banks to do the work that the Department of Work and Pensions ought to be doing by checking properly in the first place. But it is true that if you spread your money around a whole load of bank accounts and not just have it in one or two banks, well, it starts to get a little bit tricky. So right now, when you look to see how much fraud is taking place, when you consider just how many gangs we've now got in this country, I think that there has to be a greater look through into what people actually have got and what their accounts are. But it's not a question of passing a law and saying it's over to the banks, it's your problem. It has to be worked with the banking industry, and let's see if there is a method which can be used and a process and procedure which makes it reasonable to do the checking, but without, interfering into you and me and Mrs. Jones down the road and all the other sort of things which, if you get it wrong, people will be justifiably very upset.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Whenever sort of legislation like this comes in, because it's a sensible thing to do at the time, it starts off this big and tends to have a habit of escalating over the years into some sort of monster that nobody really wanted or predicted.
Well, that's right. But let's come back to sort of the first principles. I mean, now this is all about looking for fraud because there's fraud in the system. Well, what about doing more checks first?
Right.
What about just making sure of what it is and who it is that you're saying, yeah, that's fine for social security benefit? Because, if you pick up some of the reports elsewhere around, I mean, firstly, there's one which says apparently we've provided 88 different languages. We're prepared to provide translation into people. Well, yes, OK, but hang on. First of all, they have come to this country. Yeah. Secondly, I'd like to know if they've got rights of entry. Thirdly, I thought the whole intention was that we allowed into this country people for jobs that we have available and not for those to just end up on our social security benefit system. So that there's something deeply wrong right through the system at the moment. It's checks at the front end, agreement as to who and who we do not grant benefit to. Anything that there is suspicious about gangs, let's go for the gangs. And I know that it's very easy to say it's in this or that particular community. But frankly, if it is in this or that community, then it has got to be brought up, because in the end, it's all of us who are paying for this.
No, exactly. And actually, when you look at organised crime and look at the trends, it's very easy to see who the main perpetrators are. And there's nothing racist or xenophobic about going, oh, look, factually, empirically, most of this fraud is happening from these people, so let's make sure we target them. But the other thing, you mentioned translators. You're right, taxpayers are spending $8 million a year on interpreters. Now, $8 million a year in the grand scheme of things is naffle, isn't it, frankly? It's a penny down the back of the sofa when it comes to the entire government budget. But it's about it's about the principle behind this. Like you said, you know, if you can't speak English, you're not contributing to the economy, are you? It's that simple. You're probably not even working on a factory production line if you can't understand instructions being said to you. So get out. Why are you doing here? I think we need to get real about saying if you don't speak English, then I'm sorry, you don't get a translator, and actually make it. It sounds horrible, but make it uncomfortable for people who don't want to integrate from actually being here.
It's very common in other countries, actually, not to provide whole lots of translators for different languages. I mean, I know from my own experience in France, for example, if you have to pay your French tax, and by the way, they can just help themselves into your bank account in France in a way which we don't have in the UK. I'm not advocating that. But if you wish to communicate with the French revenue system, you have to do it in French. Now, there is a point in providing some translation services when you have got significant alternative communities, other communities from other countries that are living in your country with other language. But when it comes to 88 languages, and when it comes to saying that we're providing all this translation, as you say, £8 million in the scheme of things is small, but there's something here about principle, there's something here about culture, there's something here about having let a system get out of control, which requires further thinking through. I do believe very strongly in the whole immigration area. Somehow it seems to be different departments have different views. So on the one hand, you've got the Home Office supposedly trying to get a grip of this. On the other hand, you've got the Inland Revenue providing translation services, or Social Security, DWP, providing translation services. It makes me wonder if they ever sit down and say, what is the cross-government plan? How many of what particular skills do we say, right, there's a real need in this country? Once people arrive, how do we integrate them? Do we let them go and disappear into communities? Or do we say, no, come on, English is part of it. And that's how you have to get yourself first in English, and you have to get yourself a job, and you have to meet the commitments. And if you don't meet the commitments, then you can't just stay here forever. There may be reasons for staying, but there has to be a proper check and balance. It's not just a one-way street.
Right, I absolutely agree. And before I let you go, Angela, one thing I don't understand is when we had all this benefits fraud and setting up all these fake profiles to claim universal credit.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, I've never had to claim universal credit. I don't know how it works. But it seems to me that you can just go online and fill out a form or something. Because if you actually had to present yourself in front of a person, sit down, have an interview, who are you? What are your skills? Why do you not have work? What is your family situation? Please provide us documentation and evidence. What is your intentions? How are you going to find jobs? You wouldn't be able to sort of game the system like this. Is this what goes on? Does someone just have to make a phone call or something and then all of a sudden the government's sending money to you?
I think quite a lot of the checks is now just done automatically. And and there has been certainly something post-COVID which has made so much of the whole, personal checking system. It seems to have been put to one side in this and in a number of other areas. But yes, I agree with what you are saying, that on the one hand, we want those who deserve social security, because we do have this big welfare safety net, and rightly so in this country. But it needs to go to people who do genuinely deserve it. And then there's a whole raft of others where fraud is part of it, where I think face-to-face checking, then you'd know whether it was the same person trying to swing the system in 16 different ways or whatever. But get that face-to-face thing back if there's any suspicion. And I think that's probably the line, because if you say you've got to do it for everybody, you can just imagine delays would be horrendous. But if you say where there's any suspicion, so, come back to your earlier point, Albanian gang. So when it is an Albanian, say, sorry, Albania, I'm sure there's plenty of lovely people, but we do have that problem here. So when there is any suspicion, then it has to be a face-to-face interview. Might be certainly one way of gatekeeping this whole system better.
Angela Knight, it's fantastic catching up with you again. Great to have you on the show. We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, our final segment of the programme, we're going to be discussing, is this the end of James Bond? Well, Amazon's now bought the rights of James Bond, but apparently this gives them creative control over the franchise. Does this mean no more Bond films are going to be made in the spirit of the Bonds before? I've got not much idea about whether this is, going to happen or not. I don't like the idea if it might happen, but a man who might know a thing or two and have an opinion to give us is Graham Rye. He's the editor of the 007 magazine. Shaken Not Stirred. He's coming up after this.
British people, they want to live in a self-governing country. You know, they don't want to be, moved back into the sort of the supranational bureaucracy of the EU. And actually, I think there's a growing number of people who want to leave the European Convention of Human Rights. You know, I think people want to live in a self-governing national democracy. But I think it's very sad because I think all over the world right now we're seeing, right-wing governments come to the fore. We're seeing the left, the centre-left collapsing. But at precisely that moment, we're stuck with Keir Starmer and whoever the Labour Party are replacing with for the next 4 years.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. Now, do you know what? My other half and I decided, because when it comes to entertainers, we've got everything in common, right? The two of us, apart from our personalities, which are literally like that. But actually, we're both sort of, massive MAGAists and quite funny people, and we love a good game of Trivial Pursuit, and we love cooking and, drinking, and we're sort of the perfect match. You couldn't really find two people who go together better. But like most relationships, we have our problems. And one of those problems is, well, what should we watch on television, darling? Oh, I don't know. Shall we watch Police Chase? I'd rather watch, Bridget Jones' Diary and that sort of thing. And so, especially when it comes to films, some of the stuff he's made me watch. He made me watch something about some Turkish prison or something. I don't know. It was just morose and boring. But, he kind of likes gore and death and psychological trauma, whereas I like, things like Saving Mr. Banks. He didn't mind that one, actually. But we came to a decision between us that how about we just watch all of the Bond movies? I was like, this is going to be such a cool thing to do. I'd not seen them all, let alone sort of done a concerted effort to watch them all, within a short space of time. And we've also got this weird habit of roaming around the charity shops of Wiltshire trying to find them on DVD, just to make it even more difficult, rather than go on to Amazon Prime and pay to rent them. No, too easy. We add a bit of intrigue to the tombola by going into charity shops and seeing what Bond DVDs they have. And when you get down to having watched about 75%, it then gets really hard. But that is indeed what we have been doing. And so we talk a lot about James Bond between us. And it's interesting, isn't it, how much of a sort of cultural tie time capsule James Bond is. So not only, when you watch Bond throughout the era, the fashions change so dramatically, you know, the sort of late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties and onward. When you look at it, and the sports cars as well, it really is a time capsule into a period, but also what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. It's just, I think that because I was just looking at the screen there and there's Roger Moore just undoing a woman's dress. The likelihood is he probably walked into that room about 15 seconds before and doesn't even know the lass's name. And when they said, oh, we've got to make Bond a little bit more acceptable to the modern age, I was like, no, you don't. But then kind of when you watch them back again, especially the Roger Moore ones, and he just goes into the room and goes, hello, and basically grabs a woman by the throat, pins her up against the wall and starts like forcibly snogging her while she's like, no. You think, yeah, okay, that is a bit disturbing. But it is this amazing sort of time capsule of how our own culture has changed in terms of political correctness, in terms of attitudes towards women, in terms of humour even. They should never put sort of, you know, a sensibility checks, whatever they're called, trigger warnings on Bond, because it's hilarious, it's brilliant, and actually most of us can just see that, yeah, I mean, James Bond does things that the rest of us don't do. So if he does walk into a woman and, like, you know, into a room and go straight for a woman in kind of a sort of aggressive way, he also, I don't know, scales mountains with one hand. Mess it up. Have they messed it up already? I don't know. I think they probably have. You can let me know what you think about Bond in the dying minutes of this show. 03444991000 is the number to send me a WhatsApp, 87222 on the texts. Meanwhile, shall we have a little chat now to Howard, who's in Blackpool? Hi, Howard.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What is on your mind, Howard?
Well, I'm going to talk about benefit fraud. I would talk about Bond, but you haven't got enough time, so...
Well, this is what the next James Bond is going to be. He's going to be a man who's on benefits because he's lost his job because of cuts to MI5 and MI6.
Might it be a man wearing a dress?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I think we've got to prepare ourselves for that. It's probably going to be someone who's no longer allowed to be Doctor Who.
Well, yeah, exactly, but they won't get to see him because they won't be able to get an appointment, will they? So
Exactly. Right, now let's talk about benefits, Howard.
I worked in both central and local government many years ago, investigating and dealing with fraud. The problem is that no government wants to invest enough people into investigating fraud.
Right.
They don't look at it like, well, if we spend $5 million on salaries, but they're going to recover $10 million, we're then ahead of the game. Now, you can't quantify the amount of deterrent you have, but when I was doing it, there was something like 50 million live national insurance numbers.
Right.
And there were only a working population of adults of maybe just short of 40 million. Now, that's a problem.
Right, so you only got 10 million people, and you're like, who the heck is that?
Exactly. Now you've got people working for organised crime, working in DVLA, and all these other government departments.
What, people actually working inside DVLA are connected to organised crime, you're saying?
Correct.
What?
So that's how people get their ID. They're going to get, and there'll be people working in the passport office. Nobody will really know about it, but I could write a book, but I'm not allowed to.
Oh, blimey, I didn't know about this. I mean, you kind of hear this stuff happening in other countries.
Well, you get somebody inside the passport office and you've cracked it, haven't you?
Blimey.
So, and all sorts of things are and will be going on, but no government wants to throw money at it. That's the problem. So if they're saying there's 80 billion defrauded, I'm guaranteeing you'll be at least 50% more.
I tell you what, Howard, you and I have had some insight into this, because here's a little known fact about me. I'd even forgotten of this fact about me myself. Back in the day when I was a student, my mum always used to work at the NHS in admin, and she sort of over one summer got me in working at the NHS as well, just doing like invoicing on the computers, you know, filling out little cells in a spreadsheet and things like that. Then at one point I was called in to help the counter fraud team because they had a big investigation taking place into a dentist in a particular part of Gloucestershire who seemed to be making a ridiculous amount of claims for things like braces and fillings and x-rays and all sorts of stuff. And it was like, wow, this guy's business has boomed. When does he have the time to see all these patients? And so they had to start going through all of the medical records and basically saying, right, this person's had treatment, look at the medical records, we'll pull them out, does it match up? And that's what I was doing, leafing through loads of sort of not reading medical records but looking at patient numbers. Turned out about 50 to 60% of people who he was apparently doing medical work on were registered as dead. So he had committed mass fraud. So actually, when you say that there are people who, you know, baked into the system doing these things, I know it actually. I've seen it with mine own eyes. You're absolutely right.
Well, that is the problem. And now we've got computerisation. There shouldn't be a problem. There shouldn't be a problem in recovering benefits that shouldn't have been paid out. They could recover it all through the income tax system or via the benefit system, deducting money off people's money or
well, this is it. Maybe at some point in the future, when AI isn't as scary as I think it's going to be, we can just doge the lot of it and then make some money back.
It's about time, because it's millions and millions going out of the door and nobody really wants to do anything about it.
Howard, my darling, thank you ever so much for your call. That was Howard in Blackpool, lifting the lid on the fact that we do have a few issues here and there when it comes to corruption within the great body of the UK state. Hey, look, it's James Bond.
Hey.
Hey.
Yeah, the Amazon boys have been on the blower. I start a week on Tuesday.
Oh, right, OK, because you've got to plug your mic. All right, Bond, plug your microphone in.
Oh, yeah, got to do
It's not very slick, is it?
Well, we had a...
If you can't, you can't talk, your microphone's not plugged in.
Yeah, but you can hear me a bit.
Oh, shout then, shout. Oh, shall I lean forward into you and you can just shout
there
into
you go.
mine?
Is that better?
Is that better? Can we hear him now?
Beautiful.
Very slick. Shaken, not stirred. There
Shaken,
you go.
never, ever stirred.
Well, here is Stephen saying Henry Cavill. Is it Henry Cavill? I don't know anything about Cavill. He'd make a great, but I don't even know who he is. Probably be okay.
Yeah, he didn't get the part, but...
Oh, it was you, of course.
It wasn't. Yeah.
Do you know, you'd have loved to see me in action since the last advert break. We were going to get someone from 007 magazine to talk all about Amazon taking over the Bond franchise. And anyone who knows me knows that I am really bad on anything to do with pop culture or entertainment. Get me ranting about geopolitics or politics, I'm like, hold my beer. And Ted goes, yeah, the guest hasn't turned up. You're just going to have to fill.
You're going to have to fill.
I deserve a blooming medal for that.
I mean, well, you know who wrote Bond, so, you know.
Ian Fleming. He also wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
That's always the good factoid,
That's always
isn't
the great
it?
fact, yeah.
Yeah,
Have you ever read any of the actual books?
No, not any Bond.
I haven't either.
No. Nor have I read Chitty Chitty Bang Bang Street.
Neither have I.
But I've seen the film.
I've seen the film. Good
Many
film as well.
times,
Yeah, Trudy Scrumptious. Loved her. She died, didn't she?
What, in the film?
No, the actress.
Oh, right, I was going to say, that'd be a dark kids movie, wouldn't it?
But, I mean, look, we may as well riff on Bond and just,
we can riff on Bond. So, everyone's talking about their favourite Bond, is it Roger Moore, Sean Connery? Then, of course, you can go George Lazenby.
No one says George Lazenby, that's weird.
Well, yeah, but when you get these Bond aficionados, who was the Irish fella that did it for a while? What was his name?
Why are you giving me Trivial Pursuit
Come on, what's his name? Somebody in your ear will tell you. Piers Brosnan.
Oh, Piers Brosnan,
a lot of people say Piers Brosnan was the one. And
I think he was good, actually.
And who was the other guy? It was kind of around that era.
There was that funny one who popped up. It wasn't George Lazenby. Timothy Dalton.
Dalton.
George Lazenby. I've seen that film. He kind of creeps me out. I don't know why.
I think, wasn't there way back? Did someone? Oh, who was it? Like way back, there was an odd, like, for one film only. Which sounds like a title of one of their movies.
Yeah, all I've got is Ted go, oh, yeah, and then the shout explosives down my ear because he can't remember.
Yeah, so Ted's popular culture knowledge is up there with yours.
I know, frankly. Mine's just swimming. No, we've said George Lazenby and Timothy Dalton. Was just the one? Was there another one?
I think there's been a couple of others.
Extra. Apparently there was a Bond film that isn't technically a Bond film.
Yes, there was. And it had somebody...
So Sean Connery or something in it, but it wasn't actually a Bond film, but it was James Bond or something. I don't know.
That just sounds like a scam to me, Alex.
I know, we need to doge Bond.
I want scam.
Doge Bond.
Yeah, we could strip that franchise of all that vending machines on set. What are they talking about? No, lie.
But it is one thing. It's a bit like saying, milk and first in tea. When you start opening up to the sort of public forum about Bond.
Jaffa cake, biscuit or cake.
Yeah, it is one of those talking points. For the record, because people at home will be talking about it with themselves, favourite Bond and favourite Bond film. They don't have to be the same.